Tonight, June 25th, 2025 at 8 p.m. Eastern, the FDH Lounge breaks down the 2025 NBA Draft in real time as the association enters the Cooper Flag era. FDH Hoops analyst Ben Chu joins us live from its perch in Portland to help analyze the rapidly changing NBA landscape and how the moves that come from this draft and upcoming free agency will shape it further. Who are tonight's winners and losers? We'll tell you. Stay tuned for the 2025 Pro Hoops Draft Night 1 Extravaganza on the FDH Lounge. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the FDH Lounge. It's NBA Draft Night, and you have with you, unsurprisingly, FDH Lounge dignitaries Rick Morris and Ben Chu, and we are here to break it all down. That is Ben 11-0 Chu, he of the 11-0 streak and the NBA Finals picks on the show dating back to 2014. So feels like we just did the Finals review because we did just last night. But, Ben, good to have you back on, my man. And we got a lot to look forward to here tonight. It is, as was said by that gentleman in the opener, the beginning of the Cooper Flag era in the NBA.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's outside of literally the Victor Wembanyama draft. It's probably one of the more hyped drafts we've seen in recent memory. So it's going to be really interesting. Again, like the last time a player of Flag's potential and ability went to a team that was already sort of pre-made was Penny Hardaway when he went to Orlando with Shaq. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out. I know in case anyone hasn't seen the news, Kyrie just updated his contract with Dallas. Daniel Gafford also re-signed there. So there's going to be some opportunity to spend some time, and also they're probably going to use that mid-level exception on a guy like D'Angelo Russell or Malcolm Brogdon, who's still available at this time. So Dallas is going for a full rebrand, but it would not surprise me if Flag ends up living up to that potential. He's going to be a guy who is in this league for a long time and could eventually become a face of a franchise. But like I noted, it is very, very rare at this point, super rare, that any top flight prospect, barring some insane trade at some point, gets to a team like this at this part of his career.
That is true. That is true. It's pretty rare. And you of course, comparing Penny Hardaway there going and playing with Shaq. So that's Penny going and playing with a number one overall pick, as will be the case with Cooper Flag playing with Anthony Davis there, who for at least the 50-some games a year we can pencil him in at, right, Dallas fans? But yeah, so that will be what they will have. I have to tell you, too, that for anybody that is tuning us into us here tonight, I applaud the wise choice that you're making rather than sit through Jay Billis cracking wise about wingspans for 3.5 hours as though he invented the term and everything else. I happened to see when I was channel surfing past ESPN today something about is Cooper Flag and Dallas going to be the primary competitor to Oklahoma City as champion? Like, that might be the most ESPN chyron I've ever seen in my life, and that covers a lot of ground.
I'd also say, too, again, I don't think any one of us is, Kyrie's still going to have to rehab an ACL, and we're going to have to see the health of both him and Anthony moving forward. But we also have to know, too, if Flag turns out to be what a lot of people think he's going to be, he's going to be a player that can stay with, you can help build a franchise around. And the one thing that I think we all tend to forget, too, is that he's going to be in a rare situation where he'll get to learn the game kind of at his own speed instead of the franchise's speed. Because we see a lot with a lot of these overall number ones, they are forced to be the number one guy. And in this case for Flag, he can kind of take a back seat, work with guys like Anthony Davis, guys like PJ Washington if he's still there, and then work with some of these other younger players on Dallas, just looking at the remainder of that roster.
Yeah, and it is a situation there, man. And I talked about this previously. I think this might have been from you and I doing our sort of emergency podcast the day of the Shock Luka trade, that a guy like Kyrie Irving, that he had lived through a very rare experience in terms of being a sidekick to LeBron James, and then another budding generational player in Luka. And now there's Cooper Flag. So Kyrie's played with two of these guys before. So, I mean, this year, again, it's mostly going to be rehabbing, probably sitting on the bench a good chunk of the time. I'm guessing that he's going to be there as much as the physical circumstances allow for. And there's a lot that he can put in Cooper Flagg's head about, what it is to try to become that kind of a player, that kind of a presence based on what he's observed. And oh, by the way, and again, shout out to our friends on the Dumb Zone podcast out of Dallas. I mean, I'm as flabbergasted as they are that we're saying this about Kyrie, because Kyrie, being the wise old head, is not necessarily the third act or fourth act or whatever that we might have seen for his career. But whether it be, and I think it's a growing sense of pragmatism on his part, if it doesn't work out in Dallas, where's it going to work out for him? Where's there going to be a better spot than this? So Kyrie getting to this point, however it happened in his life, however unlikely it might have seemed when he was posting heinous conspiracy theories about various peoples back during the pandemic, he got to a point now where he can contribute wisdom to Cooper Flagg, having played with two unicorns previously.
Yeah, and on top of that, too, another guy that we have to also bring up, too, is Klay Thompson, who could be a guy that could help with Flagg's sort of maturity and growth within the league. And also, too, it would not shock me Dallas, after this pick is made, decides to make some additional moves in this offseason just to kind of sort of filter out the roster a little bit more. Because I know a couple of old guys last year, Brandon Williams and Najee Marshall, who definitely were great players off of the bench for Dallas when they made that trip to the play-in tournament. We don't know the history of some of these guys coming up, because that Dallas roster last year was pretty solidified around Luka, and then now we have sort of an amalgamation of long-term veterans and young talent that still exists. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the Mavericks and Nico Harrison decide to really build this roster around either their superstars or Cooper Flagg himself.
Yeah, and of course there was a lot of punchlines out there about what Nico Harrison might look to get for the number one pick. But again, they are keeping the pick. It is going to be used on Cooper Flagg. They're not going to make two generational fumbles in the course of less than 6 months. And so again, the 1.8% that had to go Dallas's way for them to be first overall. A highly unlikely, as the late great Gorilla Monsoon might say, but it worked out that way anyways. And it works out for Dallas. And talking about, again, the last player who was at the unicorn level, I think even higher than Cooper Flagg, with all due respect to him, because we'd never seen a prospect like him before. Victor Wembanyama 2 years ago. San Antonio at number 2 again here. So San Antonio, as you and I did the live draft lottery show a couple of weeks ago, themselves the beneficiary of good luck. And I called it right then and there. Like, this is the perfect landing spot. If there is going to be a Giannis trade, I could see San Antonio as being the place. It hasn't materialized yet by tonight. We don't know if it will be. It seems more and more likely, as unusual as it may be, that the old Greek freak might be staying in Milwaukee. He is looking at a depleted Eastern Conference landscape, sure, but what he's got around him is just a pale pastel of what he had 4 years ago when the team won the championship. So San Antonio, again, they're in a very good spot to use that pick. Presumably, Harper will be the pick in the second spot here. Ron Harper's son, Dylan Harper, the great combo guard from Rutgers. So he will presumably be the pick number 2 overall. I think we'd be shocked if that wasn't the case, whether San Antonio keeps it or trades it. And again, the way that the NBA works, it's a little convoluted. You have to pretend as though you're keeping the pick, even if you're not. The prospect has to put the hat on for the team that took him, even though they've already agreed to trade him. So there's no indication that San Antonio has or will trade the pick. I still think they might, but it'll almost certainly be Harper putting on the Spurs hat at number 2 tonight.
Right, and Dylan Harper, we saw too, is going to be a very interesting prospect just in general. I mean, let's be honest, during his time at Rutgers, he has a great ability to get to the basket, play downhill, draw those fouls, and he should be able to, in this sort of pace and space game in today's NBA, do his best. The problem I think you probably saw, and I saw at Rutgers with him too, is that his ability to pull up for a jump shot is still his issue right now. He's not as consistent as he should be at this point of his career.
Right.
But again, too, he's a very young player, and again, he he has all the tools in the toolbox at the end of the day. But I just kind of feel like if you're looking at this sort of scenario for San Antonio, they have a very crowded backcourt right now with essentially Castle, him, De'Aaron Fox, Devin Vassell. So it feels like a trade will be made at some point to sort of alleviate that logjam with guys. But I completely understand why San Antonio is doing what they want to do at this point, right? It just be kind of officially looking for trying to move their way towards the future with Victor Wembanyama, but also consider a lot of these superstars who will be coming up in the next year or two, because they just now have a glut of great players at guard. And while Victor is an amazing player, as we know, it's still not this. They're still a little bit weaker in some of these other positions in the backcourt.
Yeah, they are. And that's the thing here too. And by the way, if you want to check everybody out there, this is on page 8. Pro Hoops Draftology 2025 available on the main page at fantasydrafthelp.com. If you're listening to us tonight, watching us, there's no reason not to have this in front of you as part of your multimedia experience of taking in the draft. And so, yes, when you look at San Antonio, for example, I mean, if they had their positional druthers, they would be looking at potentially getting a power forward or a small forward. One might perhaps say a center instead of a power forward, depending on where you're going to play Wemby. And that, again, his preference might be to log some more moments at the 4 than at the 5. And certainly with the way that his frame is, he could be forgiven if that were the case. But yeah, front court, if they had their druthers. But Dylan Harper is somebody that you just can't pass on, number 2. And it is now official that Cooper Flagg has been selected by Dallas, although I could say cynically, what did I say a minute ago? It's going to be whoever drafted him, regardless of where he ends up. But yes, we will have to believe that this is where he ends up, notwithstanding the fact that Nico Harrison is the GM. The ultimate, I don't know that I've ever seen a mulligan like this in recent sports history as far as Dallas ending up with this guy. And it just basically plug and play as far as the prodigy to take over the next generation. And setting up something where, again, in the state of Texas, we've seen it in years past. Back during the heyday of the San Antonio Spurs, when they had their dynasty going, they had a lot of great playoff rivalries with Dallas. And you throw Houston into that as well. The 3 of those teams, Houston now with the Kevin Durant trade that was made over the weekend here, they are going full throttle for right now. Word comes out today that Fred VanVleet is going to be redoing his contract to stick around in Houston, which makes sense. They're going for it now and the year after and the year after that. So the battle between these teams here, again, San Antonio is the furthest back on the timeline of these teams, but we've seen in terms of what Oklahoma City did 2 years ago, becoming a title contender, and of course the champion this year, Houston making that huge leap forward this past season. It's become very recent tradition in the NBA for somebody to do this. I'm not sure anybody's better placed than San Antonio to do it, particularly if Wemby is back healthy. And again, we have to make sure that, the blood clot situation doesn't come up again. And that can't necessarily be taken for granted. But you're looking at one heck of a 3-way rivalry in the state of Texas between these teams for a minimum of the next half decade, the way that this is going.
Right, and in a way, it's the 2010s all over again, right? Like the same time with the Spurs, the Rockets with James Harden, Spurs with Duncan and company, and then Dallas with Dirk and Steve Nash for that small period of time. It really went back from the Texas basketball was down for a bit, and now the incline is now coming back up again. So it's going to be really interesting, and I know we'll talk more about like Kevin Durant in a future episode down the line, but it almost feels like too that it's going to be very interesting to see how that sort of lineup with that team looks to begin with. And I mean, we're going to see more Jabari Smith, more Amen Thompson, or VanVleet. So it's going to be a very interesting pairing and group of starting 5 essentially for the Rockets.
And I have to say also, too, it is interesting in the sense that you read some of the different analyses of the deal. And there was one that I was reading, I think it might have been on CBS, where somebody was opining that it's a situation where Durant is going to a circumstance where He's not going to have another star right there with him at this point in time. And I'm looking at it like that seems to be an impressive amount of disrespect being thrown the way of Alperen Sengun, because, again, also out of Pro Hoops Draftology 2025, again, available on the main page of fantasydrafthelp.com, our list of the top 30 players in the league, not in a fantasy sense, but just top 30 overall. He's been a fixture on the list a minimum of the last 2 years, and he's on the list this year at number 25, up from number 27 a year ago. Kevin Durant is 11, up from 15th a year ago. Now, part of that is injuries to a few of the guys ahead of Kevin Durant on the list here, who we have them listed with an asterisk on where they would have been on the list here. But a great amount of disrespect being thrown the way of Sengun to overlook him as far as the Durant not having a Robin to his Batman. I thought that was a dumb take.
Right, and again, like, I think we also exist, too, in the league now. It's full of parity, Rick. We know that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
we've had 7 different titles and 7 different champions in 7 different years, and
yeah,
again, like the whole discussion of you need a team to win, and sometimes you just have bad luck, and that it's a whole discussion like of rings of championships in the NBA, and we seen players from Giannis to LeBron to some of the old heads. Essentially, that's what they would like themselves to be called, being like, well, it's a team accomplishment, right? At the end of the day, so you can only do so much, but
that's true. And it is a situation where, again, you're going to have Durant and Van Vliet, and then predominantly a bunch of younger guys around them there in Houston. So that's an interesting mixture of the timeline, and to a certain extent, you have that already in San Antonio, with them really starting to go for it to some degree last year, getting De'Aaron Fox. Back when I think they still had the faint hope potentially of being at least a play-in team before Wemby went down for the season. So it's one of these deals where, and again, if San Antonio, if they do end up making a move for Giannis, now again, it will take a lot of their draft picks and young talent to be able to pry him out of Milwaukee, but it will still be, that'll be sort of an interesting mixture of the timeline as well. You could have all 3 teams in the state of Texas having players at the forefront where we're on a win now type schedule, but then also with young talent with significant upside that is the supporting cast, guys that are going to be there presumably for a much, much longer period of time. It's an interesting mix, and it's one that a lot of GMs don't find to be optimal, but basically you have to sort of build your team as you can sort of do it. I remember going back years with Houston to when they had James Harden and Chris Paul there, and I remember saying on the show, like, everybody was like, OMG, Daryl Morey is reinventing the wheel. And I was just like, well, Paul was the best guy that was available for him to put with Harden. It wasn't a grand plan. You react to the landscape you have, you react to the opportunities that you have. And that's what leads to sometimes a lot of these blended timelines over a period of time in the league.
Right, and we're going to see them definitely in the next 5 years, and it's not going to shock anyone that there's going to be a lot of player movement, specifically in the Western and Eastern conferences. And there's also, on top of it, too, going to be a lot of teams now trying to get under the second and first aprons of the CBA. So we already know that those situations are going to cause teams to break up earlier, sooner rather than later. So it's going to just be a really interesting scenario for the league. And we're going to see roster construction completely changed for some of these teams overall.
Yes, that is going to be the case. As we had forecast correctly, and again, not going out on a big limb here, everybody on their mock drafts had this happening. Dylan Harper going second to San Antonio. And I think if you listen closely right now, Ben, you can probably hear a member of the Gund family yelling out, "Trade him for the son of Danny Ferry."
But, you can only do so much, Rick, at the end of the day. So
yes. Ironically,
since we've gone through the first 2, are we now officially in the fun part of the NBA draft? Now we made it to pick 3.
Yeah, because this is where again, and this was something that I had written about in our draft guide, was that Flag is one of these guys that comes along every couple of years. You go back to Wemby 2 years ago. You go back to Cade Cunningham the year before that, where there was the obvious number one. Going back, ironically, I talked about Anthony Davis before being number 1 overall to New Orleans, But he wasn't just a number one. He was the obvious number one. He's one of those guys every couple of years. It's the obvious number one. And I said, I thought that Harper, a lot of other years, could have gone potentially number one overall. But I think you could make a case even for a couple of these next guys. I think we now start the third tier of talent because I think that each of the first two players sort of occupies their own tier. But there's a possibility that any of these guys potentially last year, think about last year, think of all the question marks that there were at the top of the draft. We're into a couple of guys right now that potentially could have gone number one next year. This tier goes from 3 to 7. And this is a thing where I sometimes have a hard time remembering what I've said to you on air and off air. But if I haven't said it on air before, I'll say it now. That even somebody like Ace Bailey, if he slides, you keep hearing that he might slide, that some of these teams he didn't necessarily want to work out for or whatever. It is malpractice. The players that should go 3 to 7, the ones that went 3 to 7 on my mock draft, and I think almost everybody's mock draft, not everybody's, because I saw a few weirdo mock drafts that didn't have the same guys in the next 5 spots. But those 5 guys, in whatever order, need to be the next 5 players. And any general manager who takes somebody other than one of these 5 players in one of those spots should be fired. Because if you don't want this, I get that. It may not be a fit for your roster, whatever. Trade back. Get the value for it. Everybody around the league, I think, realizes that these next 5 guys occupy a tier unto themselves and need to be the next 5 players. And specifically, the 5 players that we are talking about, rather than just speculate here endlessly without talking about them, I'll go to my mock draft. I have Ace Bailey, the swingman from Rutgers. I got him going 3rd to Philadelphia. VJ Edgecombe, the combo guard from Baylor. I have him going 4th to Charlotte. Trey Johnson, the shooting guard from Texas. I have him going 5th to Utah. Jeremiah Fears, the combo guard from Oklahoma. I have him going 6th to Washington. And Con Newpel, the sweet shooting swingman from Duke. I have him going 7th to New Orleans. So whatever the order it is on the next couple of guys, and I do think Ace Bailey rates the highest on these guys, and I think he is a good fit for Philadelphia. I mean, I've seen online where some Philly fans have said that they will riot if Philly ends up taking another guard right now because they don't need that. And you and I have talked about this off air. Ace Bailey, if Philadelphia does what they should do, which I think at this point in time would be, quite frankly, to punt, because they're never going to get another full season out of Joel Embiid. Paul George is starting to show the wear and tear. I think trying to get out from underneath those contracts, as hard as it might be, and you'd have to attach picks and other things to it, I think that would be the way to go, and then build around Maxey and McCain on the roster there and this pick. Ace Bailey fits with that. He also fits on the timeline because him and Paul George can play alongside each other in the front court. If you want to go for it for right now, like Philadelphia is probably going to try to do in entirely futile fashion, in my opinion, he fits that scenario as well. Ace Bailey, I think, is the best of the next 5 guys because of the upside, because even if you want to call it like a homeless man's Kevin Durant, he does have that potential, that type of shooting potential for a very, very tall individual that doesn't grow on trees.
Right, and I think before this and outside of his representation, potentially wanting him to be pushed back a little bit more to go after some other teams, it shouldn't be shocking. But, I mean, I think unless Bailey gets taken here, I think we're expecting right now Philly to take VJ Edgecombe from Baylor, the 6'4" swingman who played on the Bahamian national team during that little mini run in the World Cup. But it's going to be he if that is the pick, we'll dive a little deeper into that, but he's also a very interesting player. But again, it's going to be a very crowded shooting guard, small forward region in the realm of Philly at this time.
It is going to be, and it's one of those circumstances where you see it with some teams. Kenny Atkinson's done it with the Cavs to a decent amount, sporadically putting out 3-guard lineups. You can do that situationally in the course of a game. You just can't do that for enough of 48 minutes to be able to justify a pick like this. And that's where, again, Edgecombe is arguably, I would say, neck and neck with Bailey as a talent. I have them both rated very, very, very highly. But as far as which one's the better fit for Philadelphia, it's not even a close discussion, frankly.
Right, and again, this is more in regards to the players more than, the decision-making overall. But again, we all have seen this in drafts prior to, Rick. There are instances where teams will focus on a guy and will take him because of that. So
yeah,
I'm not really super surprised. They could go an entirely other way. I know Trey Johnson was linked to them at one point or another as well. So I personally don't know what we would like to. It's just a very sort of, it's a lucky scenario for Philly to get up to this number 3 pick. Keep it essentially, because one thing we tend to forget just as the pick is coming in, that they were at risk of losing that pick at one point. So
yes,
to get a top caliber talent in this draft is just something that you have to say is important.
Yeah, and for all the people out there, for all the lily livers who say it's never worth tanking just to try to hang on to any piece of draft capital, keep in mind what Dallas did. I think it was 2 years ago. That was how they got. I believe it was. Yeah, I was going to say Gafford, but yeah, no, it was Lively. Yeah, who was a very high upside big man that they have, and indeed, Philadelphia goes for Edgecombe. So I say this jokingly. I await FDH Lounge dignitary and great friend Joe Stazak's rationalization for this pick, but I'm assuming that, though. I don't know. Joe and I have not talked about what Philly should do with this pick, and I assume that he, like the rest of the world, knows that they need another starting forward here. But again, neither Edgecombe nor McCain has the size to be able to log serious minutes here as a de facto small forward, which you would end up being if they're rolling out 3-guard lineups. So this is something where, again, in terms of, I like it a lot in terms of Edgecombe's upside, but then you turn around and you look at it like, well, the rational thing to do under these circumstances would be to try to move McCain for a forward, but he had an excellent year. He really did. But I don't know that he necessarily fetches you a forward in terms of Edgecombe and whatever you could get for McCain at forward, which I don't think they're going to do. I don't think they're going to make a trade. But in terms of Edgecombe and whoever that guy would be, I don't think it works nearly as well as if it was McCain and Bailey. So
right. And again, too, Rick, I mean, the thing overall, too, is like it was clear that Bailey's representation wanted him to go somewhere else other than Philadelphia at this point.
Yeah.
And it feels like, to me, Edgecombe is probably, and I mean, I don't think it should be crazy just what he did at the Combine. Like, he is the most explosive, most athletic player in this draft. But the issue is, and we saw this at Baylor, he was inconsistent from 3. He wasn't great with his ball handling at periods of time in the regular season. And there was the question that I think a lot of us have, including me, is that was this more that, is this one of those scenarios where he got up to this level in the draft because it's just so unknown right now from 3 to 8 who is going to get picked? Or is this more like we're going off of, like you said, the upside of an athletic guy who can eventually, like, again, I don't want to discount his 3-point shooting. It wasn't terrible. It was like 32, 34%. But it's still, he wasn't shooting it at an elite level while at Baylor.
Yeah, and so, inconsistent from 3, inconsistent with ball handling. My first thought when you say that is, gee, isn't it lucky that he's going to a town with patient, nurturing fans like Philadelphia who will gladly sit through his ups and downs?
Oh, I think you and Joe Stazak are going to have so many fun conversations regarding
I think we are. There's going to be some fun ones, and I look forward to my eventual invite back onto the Philly Pulse hosted by Joe Stazak to discuss it with him. That will be a fun discussion. And this is one where, again, we get to the point of the draft where we're starting to get some of these curve balls coming in. You've got Charlotte coming up next, and
I feel like, too, if you don't mind me interrupting,
yeah, go ahead.
I kind of feel like this is one of 2 players. Like, this doesn't really seem complicated to me.
Okay.
It feels like they're either going to take Trey Johnson of Texas, who we already mentioned, and then another guy who you mentioned during your list right there of Knuppel from Duke, which is a guy that I'm seeing his name rocket up a little bit later on some of these mock drafts that I've done in the last couple of hours. Mainly because I think he's one of the Charlotte, apparently 1 or 2 prospects. Again, this is all rumors. We don't know for sure that they turned down workouts with Charlotte potentially. So,
okay,
I know he was a guy that's been rocketing up the chart right now, and it makes sense for a young team with LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller and a young head coach in in Lee, essentially, just to be able to kind of get a guy who is very simply, he's a pure shooter. He can go up and down the court. He's a good defender, not great, but he's also someone who's very versatile, will make the correct play. The real question, too, is that his ceiling is very, like, again, he can either be a guy like Kyle Korver, who can be a knockdown shooter and then a positive on the defensive end, but at the same point, too, he could also just kind of be a guy that kind of is there, disappears a little bit. And again, the real question, too, is that the one benefit to him now, he is the most three-point ready prospect in this draft. Like, I don't think anyone's going to debate that he's not going to be able to hit a three at the NBA level.
Sure.
And he's going to get a lot of opportunities if LaMelo Ball can stay healthy, because let's be honest, LaMelo hasn't played more than 50 games in his last 2 seasons. So.
Right. And on the team needs for Charlotte in our guide, I've got primarily being small forward and center. So that's one where Knuble would definitely fit. Ace Bailey would fit as well there with his ability to play the three. And yeah, Knuble would be he'd be staying pretty close to home as far as where he played his college ball. I think it would be a pretty popular pick locally if they were to do that. And that's a circumstance where again, Charlotte they just need to have reliable guys that they can build around, because whether it be injuries, whether it be quite frankly poor drafting with high picks in years past, blowing picks, and just sometimes promising picks that don't really develop the way that they wanted them to. It's just been sort of a mishmash there of where they've been unable to accrue enough talent. So that's a thing where possibly Knuble coming in and being a pretty reliable guy, relatively high upside, but strong on reliability. And outside of Cooper Flagg and perhaps Harper, he might be maybe the best combination, I would say, in terms of floor and ceiling potentially.
Right, and I think overall, too, and we tend to forget this, too, about these drafts, Rick, and I think you'll agree with me, is that sometimes you see a lot of early draft picks are essentially drafted by potential.
Mm-hmm.
And Knuble, to me, is pretty much a ready-made player at this point. He's going to be able to play in Charlotte and make good shots if he is the pick at the end of the day. So,
I think he will. I think he's a strong, reliable player for them to be able to be part of their core to kind of build around. So I could very easily see them going that way, because, like you said, LaMelo Ball, the amount of time that he's going to be able to hold up at this point in time. Again, the kind way of saying it would be remains to be seen as far as what you're going to get out of him. They're showing on TV now, missing 141 games the last 3 seasons.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
I forgot to mention, too, I said 2 years. I meant 3 years. He hasn't played more than 50 games. So.
Yeah.
And again, he's had a bunch of nagging injuries. And again, if this was a different draft, you may have gone after someone a little bit different if you were thinking about it. What does LaMelo hold up? And I don't think, again, I feel like sometimes fans are hard on him because he's still very young. People are tending to forget he's not even 25 yet. So he's still got a long runway at this point. So
I will say something that feels like a Charlotte pick in this spot in terms of going for a guy who's high risk, high reward in terms of reaching his upside. If they were to go for Jeremiah Fears as a quasi replacement for Ball, doesn't that feel like a Charlotte pick, though?
It does, in a way. I mean, at this point, and this is a question like this, like I kind of felt like, and we've seen in the mocks, like the first 3 picks in recent memory have been at least for this draft, have been kind of locked for a while.
Yeah.
At least. This is where I think the insanity will start to begin because we don't know yet.
And what do you know? Charlotte listens to us, and Con Knuble is the pick here, number 4 overall to Charlotte. And again, for a team like that, I thought Edgecombe was going to drop to him, and I thought that would be a strong pick for them to make. But the fact that he did not, again, combination of floor and ceiling has to be very tantalizing to them, because that's just the thing. Like for Charlotte, they haven't had a whole lot of guys that they can count on over a period of time. And I have to say that for as skeptical as I was of their pick of Brandon Miller over Scoot Henderson 2 years ago, it has worked out thus far for them. Brandon Miller has been one of the guys that you can build around with this team. And he gets a running mate in the front court right here. I think this will be a strong pick for Charlotte.
Sure, I think it will be too. There are some weaknesses we do have to talk about, Rick, is that shot creation is going to be a little bit harder for Knubula in the pros.
Sure.
Because essentially at Duke, when you're playing with Cooper Flagg of all people, you're going to get a lot of great opportunities.
Right.
But, and again, one thing too that was talked about him, for whether it's a bad thing or a good thing or anything in the middle, is that he isn't his wingspan. Like, we're going to bring up wingspan. I know Jay Bill is saying it, but he's again just like a height weight guy, 6'5", like wingspan of 6'8". That's great, 6'8", 6'9". But again, for a 2-guard, potentially a 3 at periods of time, you do have to wonder defensively how he's going to be able to keep up with some of these players who are more athletic in the pro level.
Yeah. And he is a strong player in terms of creating his own shot. I mean, he's excellent on the catch and shoot balls, which again, he's going to be seeing a lot less wide open looks in the pros. You're not going to be having too many non-conference games, the equivalent of ITT Tech in the NBA level. But as far as his ability to create his own shot, probably best when he's slashing to the hole. He's pretty good at doing that. Right. He's pretty good at getting down the lane. And he's, again, guy that plays with a good motor, guy who's pretty strong in that regard. I have to say, by the way, so we are part of the way through now that tier of the 5 guys that I talked about that needed to be the next 5 picks. A dissenting opinion on this. I don't know if you have seen this or not. I'm just going to reference to you that it's an article off of True Hoop. Do you know where I'm going with this?
I think I know what you're going with this, Rick. So
the fastest rising guy on the draft boards here, such that, again, when I was looking at the player rankings weeks ago, this guy wasn't factored in significantly in the first round. But again, this is the whole thing here too, and it's such a great story in terms of the way that this guy is developed and everything like that. And you hope it's not, when you look at how he did at the combine, which it's sort of a story of before and after the combine as far as the way that he opened people's eyes. You certainly hope it's not the NBA equivalent of Mike Mamula, but Cedric Howard from Washington State, previously from Eastern Washington, a guy who worked his way up, a guy who was basically a nothing prospect coming into college, and a guy who was, worked himself into and developed into sort of an unprecedented rise just to get into, first of all, the first round, now lottery consideration. And this article on True Hoop is arguing that he should go 2nd overall in the draft, which he did not do. This just in. He did not go there. But this is the opinion comes from David Thorpe. And there's an interview on there. It's worth checking out. And you do get to get a good amount of insight about Cedric as a player here. But again, 2nd overall, ahead of any of the first 7 guys. Nah, I don't see it. But the way he's going, it does look like he'll end up in the lottery somewhere.
I think also, too, one thing we also have to note, too, Rick, was that again, I'll go back on this again, too, Rick. This is literally a scenario where scouts are trying to make decisions. And he didn't have a big sample size this season during college basketball season. So this is a lot of, we're trying our best. Scouts and GMs are trying their best to figure out what they can do at this period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, there's a lot of extrapolation going on with that. But as far as somebody that was kind of lightly regarded at the collegiate level, less lightly regarded than him still. But if you're going to be compared to anybody at this moment in time, at this precise moment in time, Jalen Williams would not be a bad comp to have attached to your name. And I've seen this in more than one place. Thorpe isn't the only guy to have made that point of comparison. So I don't know if it's going to pan out or not. I'm always a little bit skeptical of these fast rising guys, when it's not based as much off of tape from the previous season. But it's one of those things where it is an amazing, amazing story. And I mean, and I don't say this lightly, the kind of thing where even if it ends up only being a made-for-TV movie, this may be chronicled at some point. If this guy goes on to have a substantial NBA career, it will, small screen, big screen, whatever. The story will be on a screen somewhere because of the unprecedented rise of this guy.
And we've seen also, too, especially in our streaming day and age, so many things. We also saw Giannis had a movie with Disney Plus. So, I mean, if Giannis gets a movie, I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure Cedric could get a movie too.
I think so. And so you're looking at a situation where, yeah, I mean, he is not going to be going in the next couple of picks, I don't believe, because like I said, I think the general managers in these situations know that again, you've got to basically color within the lines here somewhat as far as the recognized tiers of talent that are out there. Once you get past the top 7, it's very interesting, Ben, because you could almost, you go 8 maybe down to about 14. You have a lot of the same guys that sort of keep popping up after that in there. Kasparis Jekasionis, the combo guard from Illinois, that's a guy that you keep seeing in there. Maluch, the center from Duke, he probably factors in the next couple of picks. Potentially Carter Bryant, the small forward from Arizona. Colin Murray Boyles is a fast rising 4/5 from South Carolina. There's a number of guys right in there, but then maybe about 13 or so down to about 28. It's very open-ended.
Yeah, it will be. And I think we have our first surprise of the day, I guess.
We do, and this is a thing where this raises a lot of questions right now, because I think everybody just assumed, okay, the tank is on for next year for Utah. AJ DeBanza, we're just going to try and get the first pick again next year. But Ace Bailey, this high ceiling guy, I mean, that's the thing here. Like, you don't get Cooper Flagg, but you come out of this draft a lot better than you thought you would for not getting Cooper Flagg. Ace Bailey drops to you at 5. I mean, I think that's an excellent scenario for Utah. The only exception to that would be if you really thought you were going to tank for another season. So maybe it's a thing where, again, maybe you bring them along really slowly. Maybe you sort of like deliberately drag your heels in that way. And you and I have talked about this off air, that it's a really, Utah having the kind of year that they had was shocking. And I know that you ascribed a lot of this to coaching and everything like that, and I think that probably was the case. But it's like, I've never seen a team with so many good players be so bad. There's nobody that's great. And sorry, FDH Lounge dignitary Bob Glassman, that includes Lauri Markkanen. He was second-guessing the Mitchell trade when it happened in 2022 because of Markkanen. Markkanen might be the best player in the trade. Well, that's a take that's aged like milk, Bob, as I told you that it would. And I love Bob. But, like, they don't have anybody that's even necessarily very good. But they've got good players in that starting lineup, and they've got a little bit of depth in their rotation, and then they won, like 18 games? I've never seen anything like this. Normally, teams that win 18 games stink. Utah's roster does not stink. It's incredible. You watched more of them than I did. You must have some ideas on how it happened.
And I mean, my thing too, and then we'll get to Bailey in a moment, is like they have a very good roster, very deep. And again, we all know the altitude in Salt Lake City definitely is an advantage for them to play on. But again, they are still a very young team, and they lost a handful of very close games last season. So it's not. It's more surprising that this was the worst team by record in the NBA, because there were some teams that we knew were trying to essentially get Cooper Flagg. But to get to Bailey, the interesting part to me overall is he did not do a workout in Utah. I'm wondering if this is potentially a trade that could be happening in the next couple of 20 to 30 minutes. So, but overall, I mean, it's a very interesting roster, and Bailey does fit a need for them because they do have Markkanen. They do have, John Collins also exercises player option today, so he'll be back. So, but Bailey has the ability to grow there. But again, the simplest thing about him, he's a dynamic player. We like you said, poor man's Kevin Durant. I think he's within that same range. Also, kind of like we've seen a lot of combo guards and like small forwards come through in recent memory. So he's going to be a really interesting fit. But I almost feel like, Rick, this is a trade that will essentially occur maybe in the next since we're going to be on for the entire person, maybe next 30 minutes to 45 minutes, because it seems very bizarre that a team would draft a guy that didn't work out for them. But again, we're also in a new timeline there in Utah too, with Austin Ainge taking a little bit of a bigger role in the front office there. So it's going to be interesting. Like, the pick makes sense just because there is a need there to get sort of a perennial shot maker, but it's going to just be very interesting to see what the Jazz do moving forward.
Yeah, and in looking at the circumstance, it's one of those things where the funny thing about doing this show with you here is that we are aspirationally seeking to be the second screen experience for a lot of folks out here who are watching the picks come in on TV. Whereas for us, the actual TV presentation is the second screen for us as we're doing this. So as you were talking, I was casting an eye on this here, and it's one of those things where, again, and I don't have the closed circuit going. I'm just watching body language, and when he was being interviewed, Mr. Bailey, a second ago here, there are many prospects you see who get interviewed who look enthusiastic, and I would say that his demeanor was politely restrained, basically. Like he did not, his body language was not poor. It was not like, this sucks, I want out of here. But it wasn't like, yay, I got the Utah. It was somewhere in between. So
well, I feel like, again, this is either a trade or this is essentially Utah using Ace Bailey as their next trade chip, because I'm just going to come out and say it, because if there was rumors that he was turning down workouts left and right and didn't work out for any NBA teams, I don't see him playing in Utah at this period of time. Things may change because, again, he is the 5th overall pick in this draft, so he is still going to get pretty great money. But at the end of the day, though, Utah is just an interesting team right now, and I just, you can't really put your finger on how the Jazz kind of move on. But again, if I'm Utah, this is a very good selection for them. High upside guy who can make a lot of plays. But then again, we saw his issues at Rutgers. He tended to take a lot of bad shots. But again, like sometimes we've seen this too for college guys who become great NBA players, is that sometimes learning how to shoot in college can translate into being a better shooter in the NBA.
That's right. And in looking at the situation here again, is it safe to say, seeing what Utah does is going to tell us everything we need to know about whether next year is going to be another tank or not? Because if you keep him, then it's almost like the moment of acceptance where it's like, okay, we got our guy we might be able to build around. Whoever we get next year in the draft is gravy. But it's one of those things where if they trade him, it becomes pretty clear to like, okay, well, having him might make us win too many games this year. We can't have that happening. So, I think whether or not they keep him, it's one of those things where we're going to know, because what happens is when you get a foundational player, it's like from that moment on, you're trying to take steps forward. And so that's going to tell us, I think, everything we need to know. If they see him in that way, then that's the thing where everything they do from here on in is to try to get better, however incrementally. But if they move him, it shows that, again, they don't see him as that guy. They chose to basically extract value in the number 5 spot, which you might as well do.
And again, not surprising from Utah, essentially a team run by Danny and his son right now at this point. So again, it's right out of their playbook, essentially. So
it is. So so Utah will be worth keeping an eye on to see what direction they go in here, because that could go either way. And it's very interesting in terms of who that leaves available for the next couple of teams here. Yeah. You've got Washington and New Orleans that if we're looking at this tier of talent here, you would be looking at, again, Trey Johnson, Jeremiah Fears, and I would say in that order as far as how I have them ranked, and I think as far as how a lot of folks have them ranked. And that's a thing where I think ultimately Washington, when you're looking at needs for them, I would say pretty much in this order: point guard, power forward, small forward, and then when you're looking at New Orleans, I would say center, small forward, power forward, shooting guard. I mean, New Orleans has a lot of needs, so they can go in a lot of different directions.
Of course. And at least, both these teams can. And it looks like Washington just took Trey Johnson. So one of the more interesting guys in this class, Rick. He is. He, at Texas, played very well, was a pretty positive three-point shooter for them at this, when he was, playing really well. I mean, just very simply, he's a guy that can make shots, very simply.
Yes.
And the real weakness he ultimately has is at times being unengaged on defense, which, again, it's understandable. Yeah. You're a 19-year-old in college. You're not going to be the greatest defender at this period of time. But this does make sense, and it makes a lot with how Washington's sort of roster makeup is. it allows them essentially. We also again need to know too. This is also the timeline where Jordan Poole was traded to New Orleans for CJ McCollum. So it feels more like this is sort of they're going to put either McCollum in front of him or he's going to eventually be their two guard next to Bub Carrington. And they, despite Washington's sort of, up and downness in the last 4 to 5 years, this is going to be a very good young team that head coach Adam Keefe hopefully will get to coach. Because you have a decent starting lineup right now. You have Bub Carrington, Corey Kispert, Alex Sarr. So it's going to be the real question for them long term is how a lot of these veterans that they're bringing in, guys like Kelly Olynyk, guys like, CJ McCollum, how this is really going to work with their team moving forward.
Yeah, they have, again, it's a promising young core that they add him to. And as far as the ability to, like you said, with the McCollum and Poole trade there, is this a circumstance where potentially, you talked about Johnson potentially playing next to Carrington. I could see a situation where McCollum essentially, and maybe initially he's not coming off the bench. Maybe it's Trey Johnson, but it's sort of a de facto kind of a thing of where McCollum occupies the Vinny Microwave Johnson role where he's swinging between both spots there. I mean, that's a pretty good, 1, 2, 3 situation in the backcourt if you go at it that way.
Right. And one thing we also have to note about the Wizards, they're one of the very few teams in the NBA right now that will have a lot of salary cap space coming up.
Yes.
So they will have an opportunity to make some moves in the upcoming year. So, again, obviously, would they have loved to gotten Cooper Flag? It would have been a really good fit for them. But a guy like Trey Johnson, as long as he is engaged and can make great shots and continue to just be either the sixth man off the bench or a guy that, as a starter, can really just help lead an offense. I think that's one of the things that we discussed, too, with Harper and Bailey and Edgecombe, that we were more concerned about with them than Trey Johnson. Because Johnson, even though his team didn't play as well at periods of the time last season that they probably should have, you felt a little more confident with his decision-making at periods of time.
Yes, you did. And for as much as you said before about Knuppel as far as being the most reliable shooter in the draft, and I don't think I'd quibble with that. But, I mean, Johnson, to me, is the guy you slot in right behind him.
Right. And, I mean, it shouldn't really – and, again, we are in an NBA, Rick, where the world – all these teams are looking for more guys who can make a three-pointer.
Right.
And these guys – and, again, we've seen a lot through a lot of different teams that you can't teach shooting sometimes.
No.
So you really need to make sure that when you're drafting a guy early in the lottery, you really need to take a guy that you think can get to 34, 35, 37, 38% from three. Because if you're not shooting past 35% in the NBA right now from three-point land, you're not going to stay in the league that long.
That's true. That's absolutely the case. And it is arguably the most important skill set in the league. And it's something where, again, that's something that determines even where the big-time 4s and 5s are going. I mean, we're expecting big men in this period in time. If they're going to be high draft picks, they have to be floor spacers to some degree as well. So in this pace and space era that we're in, which is about 10 years in from when Steve Kerr took the job in Golden State and really sort of turned the league upside down. And again, the ability to shoot from distance is the most prized skill that there is. Trey Johnson helps Washington in that way. It'll be interesting to see how much he raises their upside. And again, in a depleted Eastern Conference, I mean, I don't presently have Washington as a playoff team or even a play-in team. But it would be interesting to see now that they've got Trey Johnson to see how much he raises their upside. And again, with some of the young players that are there, I talked about Houston before as far as making a dramatic jump a year ago, but another team that did, I'd say equally so because of how putrid they were the year before was Detroit. So it's like, could Washington even be potentially like a poor man's Detroit for next season as far as the leap that they can make? That will be interesting.
Yeah, and they now have and the one issue, and I think a lot of Wizards fans probably saw for the last 2 seasons, like it was a very young team, very plain and simple.
Yeah.
So now you got some veteran talent who can help push the young guys along, and then you're going to have a couple better years and probably some healthier years from Corey Kispert and Alex Sarr, it's going to be just very interesting to see where they fall, because I'll be honest too, it's the Eastern Conference, Rick. I don't think if you can get 34 wins, you may be a play-in team at this period of time.
That is possible. Yeah. When you're talking about, being the 10th record out of 15 teams in the Eastern Conference. Yeah. Now part of it is the floor that the teams with major injuries still have, because one of the things too, and again, Pro Hoops Draftology 2025 available on the main page at fantasydrafthelp.com. Go check it out there. I have in some early predictions for next season. I've got Boston. To me, Boston went from being a borderline play-in to playoff team. I've now got them as a playoff team, I think, on the 6th line after the injury that it was suffered to Halliburton with Indiana. I've got them on the 7 line now, and I've got Milwaukee. I don't remember exactly where, but I've still got Milwaukee making it at the very least the play-in tournament here. So those teams still have a floor that is not, it's above 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. But so it's not going to be the easiest thing simply because of that, but there is definitely space to move. There is room for upward mobility in the Eastern Conference. And as forecast here, the next 5 guys have been the 5 guys that I talked about here. Jeremiah Fears, the guard from Oklahoma, he ends up going to New Orleans. And again, New Orleans, in some ways in recent years, has been the graveyard of some promising talent. So one hopes that won't be the case with him. But this is a situation where you've talked about this previously here. Some real boomer bust potential with Fears. I think starting with what his shooting looked like last season.
Right, and one big thing we have to know about him, he is the youngest prospect in this draft right now.
Yes.
He enrolled at Oklahoma when he was 17 years old. So the one thing you do have to say, he is probably the most, I don't want to say flashy, because flashy is a bad word, but he's definitely a dynamic guard, can make big plays, can make that key assist. Again, the weakness that I've been saying about guards for pretty much is how is he going to handle a defense? How, the NBA level of defense. And again, too, he's still very young. So I think one of the questions is going to be will he be able to put more weight on that body and then essentially be able to and keep his speed, keep his skill set. And at times, too, again, it's going to be New Orleans their current depth chart right now, if you're just really looking at it in terms of guard play. He's going to have his ability. He's going to have time to really sort of settle in. But, I mean, one thing I do have to note, Rick, just in terms of that, is that I'm going to assume he'll be starter on day one, but I would not be really surprised since they have a pretty loaded guard group right now, including Jose Alvarado, including DeJounte Murray and Jordan Poole that they acquired from Washington. There's just a lot of guys out there right now, essentially. So yeah. I assume they would probably want to play him more often with no CJ starting. I'm going to assume now that McCollum and Poole are just going to switch places, really, in the starting lineup for both of these teams. So he is a very interesting prospect. And the real question, too, is that will he continue to ascend, or did we see the top of his ascension at this time?
Well, I mean, if we've seen the best of him, then he's going to get labeled a big fat bust, because this pick was made predicated on future development, right, more consistency.
And I'll note this too. The last time, if we're being totally honest, the last time that the New Orleans Pelicans took an Alabama point guard, that was Kira Lewis Jr., and that didn't really great coach now, but that didn't really pan out for them. So
no, it didn't. And that's a thing where, you look at that backcourt, you look at what's there, and I think, again, you do have a couple of, because of the 3 established players that you mentioned that are already there. Is there a scenario where, again, they just kind of bring him along slowly to where maybe he's more? I don't see a scenario where he's not in the rotation, but maybe where he's the 9th or 10th man potentially at the beginning of the year. I could see New Orleans being deluded enough to think that they're a contender if they get Zion healthy, which I don't think they are. I don't think there's anything you can do with this present roster that makes them a contender, but I don't think that they think that. So I wonder if it's a scenario where they may bring them along slowly. And that's something where I mean, that might work for him, but then maybe not. I could see handling him with kid gloves. I could see that going either way. I'm very indecisive.
I think also the problem, too, Rick, is that he is the youngest player in this draft.
Yeah.
And especially when you're still in that timeline of trying to develop an NBA caliber body at that point. I feel like whenever we do NBA drafts, I always feel like I'm talking in model terms at periods of time. But that's what that's the major question, because he is slight of frame. That's not a negative thing. It's just if you're going up against, as we see in today's NBA, there's a lot bigger point guards now.
Yeah.
So if you can't guard a guy like Jalen Brunson who's backing you down the entire game, you're going to run into some real problems in the NBA. So
I could see, like, if heckling on the road was one of those things where if it was like Attitude Era WWF, then it would be a thing. You'd be seeing signs in the crowd like Jeremiah fears protein shakes. You'd be seeing people with those kind of heckling things. But I
don't blame them for taking him here. He is one of probably the most intriguing upside guys in this draft.
I think so. Yeah. I mean, and I said it before. If you weren't taking one of those 5 guys in that spot, you don't have any business being a general manager in the NBA, because, again, that's where they were consensus value level. And here's where now it gets interesting, because here's where a lot of different things could start to happen. And you and I have talked about this with Brooklyn, and that it's sort of only half jokingly talked about that this is a team with a Jordi Fernandez problem, because it's a thing where he is so good at getting every little bit out of everything he has with the young talent that's there. They try to tank, but like this past year, they didn't have a crappy enough record to have a real shot at the time. Now, again, you could look at Dallas with their 1.8%, but I think enough of us are cynical enough as to how and why that might have happened. But Brooklyn, to do it the way, the way that is, the standard accepted way, which is just the tank. And again, it's funny because you may see a front office that comes to realize that they have to basically sort of give him less and less to be able to work with here. So as far as if they were able to take a player in this spot that's going to require a lot of development, I think cynically that could play into their strategy here, because Brooklyn does not want to go out and win 32 games this next season. There's no percentage in that. You're a year away from another number 1 pick, another consensus guy out there in AJ Demancia. So why wouldn't you try and tank again here? So I think it's a situation where Brooklyn with this pick becomes one of the most interesting teams of the night.
Right. And I think the argument too is like they also, like we went for a second there, I think we went to the Twilight Zone, Rick. We both lost coverage there for a second. But essentially I feel like you made the right point. And to note too, Brooklyn with that trade during getting into the Kristaps Porzingis trade, they now have 5 first-round picks, which is it's the first time in NBA history that any team has had 5 first-round picks.
Yes,
it's only happened 2 other times where teams have had 4 first-round picks. So overall, if we include the second round, Brooklyn has 6 picks, so they have a lot of opportunities. I don't think there was discussion they were going to trade up at some point, but clearly that's not going to happen now. So I think it's probably going to be just best player available for now.
Yeah, and again, how do we define best player available? This is one where, again, and this is a player that I've seen getting harshed on Twitter by a couple of smart marks out there. I don't happen to believe that this guy is an overhyped prospect. Igor Domin from BYU, there was a very interesting article on him, and I think it was on CBS Sports, about in this age of NIL, getting an international player, so coming over from Moscow to come play in the state of Utah here for a program being built on the model of an NBA program. And as you see it again next year with AJ likely to be the first player in the draft next year, but Domin helping them to get to a Sweet 16 run and a very, very good year for BYU in their initial season in the Big 12. They're a team that figures to be, even without Domin, a strong contender in the Big 12 this upcoming season. And again, somebody that really brings a lot of interesting different elements to his game. This is somebody where, again, I wondered if he might fall a little bit based on the needs of some of the teams involved, who was going to need somebody to fit one of these swingman spots. It's very interesting because this is a guy where it seems like he comes in with a fairly decent floor at this point. So again, I don't know how much it fits in the whole Brooklyn trying to, tank despite their coach kind of a deal.
Right, and again, like I said, they have 5 first-round picks, and Demin, as we all know, had a very interesting Big 12 season, had a kind of an up-and-down NCAA tournament. But if you just look at his intangibles, 6'8", great court vision, arguably we would say the best passer in this draft. But again, the issues that he has to deal with is that everything else is relatively average.
Yeah.
So he will find an opportunity to do a couple of these things well at periods of time. And in Brooklyn, as we know, they have a lot of not necessarily open roster spots, but there are a lot of guys who are not guaranteed to be on this roster in the near future. So there's some definite opportunity for a handful of picks that they could make in this draft, or potentially, again, they still have a handful of picks left. It would not shock me if they try to trade into the tail end of this lottery timeline, but it's the men. If he was more consistent, I think we have this. We wouldn't need to be having this discussion, Rick. If he was much more consistent, he has the size, he has the court vision, and you can say he was an above average to below average 3-point shooter during his time at BYU.
Right.
But again, it's also hard too, because when you only have one real season to go for, you can only do so much with that one season. So
that's right. Again, kind of an interesting, quasi-polarizing prospect going to a team with a lot of needs, with a lot of, I won't even say question marks, because a lot of them are answers, not question marks. And the answer is no. As you go up and down the roster, the answer is no for most of the guys that are there. So he will have opportunities. Yeah. This whole thing, you and I had talked about this, I think, primarily off air in terms of Brooklyn, in terms of packaging picks together. And that if this were the NFL, you'd be in prime position here. But again, that's the difference between 7 rounds and where you get into like the middle rounds of the NFL, and even those are worth something. I always kind of tend to draw a line underneath the 4th round. And when I'm doing my post-draft evaluations, I'm looking to see if teams filled their needs in the first 4 rounds of the draft. But even the 5th and 6th and 7th rounds, you can get lucky here and there, i.e. Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant a couple of years ago. But in the NBA, only 2 rounds. The second round is primarily written off by most of the teams. That is less the case these days. I think that they're raising their sights and trying to at least get rotation players there, or at least developmental players that can go overseas. But in the first round, you're not even talking about an entire first round where NBA teams will attach value. So it's a matter of like, if a team has like, the 25th and 23rd picks conceivably, like, could they interest a team with the 20th pick in that? If this were the NFL, that would certainly be the case. But it's not really the case in the NBA necessarily. It will be very interesting to see, because that's going to be the obstacle for Brooklyn, is finding teams that are like, yeah, let me trade back a few spots. Let me get a couple of different guys here. Let me roll the dice on a couple of different guys in these spots, because that's going to be in the roll the dice part of the draft anyways, primarily where it's happening. Because, again, in the NBA, getting somebody else to find value in what you have, the 5 picks in here, you and I both, I think, agree that Brooklyn's not going to walk out of here with all of them, because that would really make the roster construction for next year
also,
weird.
Too, Rick, there are a handful of teams in the middle of this draft, like an OKC, like an Orlando, like a Memphis, that could definitely use some additional picks down the line. So it's going to be very interesting. And I know we will really have to wait and see what Brooklyn does. It's also, we'll note this too, a very quiet trade draft so far. Like, over the last couple of years, there's been a lot more buzz about trades. Now, again, I also know we're only at hour 1 minute, 1 hour and like 9 minutes. So there's still a lot of time for something to go down. But the real question now too, as we head to like Toronto right now with their pick at 9, they're in an interesting spot right here. There was early discussion yesterday that the forward Noah Sengi, who played for Ratification Ulm back in Germany, was potentially their pick. Okay. But now with Maluk from Duke falling to about the 9th spot right now, this is kind of like, if we're talking just in terms of like the wheelhouse of what Raptors general management likes in a player, both of these guys fit the bill at this point.
Yeah. And when you look at over a period of time, too, the way that the Raptors franchise has been a team that has prized international players, this is also a spot where you could see Kasparas Giacosionis possibly going here as well. I've got Maluk going in this spot. I think this is where they're going to take him, but you could really see that being the case. And as far as it goes, when you mention teams that might be interested in trading back and getting more picks from Brooklyn, when you mention Oklahoma City and that, given that I watched the recent episode of Hoarders that was based on Sam Presti and all of the number one picks that he's got the last couple of years, it would be interesting. But they might do that. Now, Oklahoma City, and we'll talk about that when we get a little bit closer there. You and I have talked about this, and I think this was on air when we were talking about them winning the title and looking ahead to, because you always have to look ahead in a circumstance like this. As much of a killjoy thing as it might sound like to Thunder fans, that they're going to have to get rid of Hartenstein at some point to be able to free up money for the rest of the roster. So looking for somebody in the center spot and having 2 first-round picks here, my guess is they're throwing darts at the board center in both spots here. I seem to be out on an island on that. There are a number of folks that are forecasting that they will continue to try to accrue wings as though they don't have enough of those on their roster. But they could go in any number of different directions. But ultimately, what Toronto ends up doing here, and they are making their selection right now, this is somewhat going to set the tone for a couple of the teams behind them here, particularly if they end up going in a direction that with a player that somebody else might have wanted. And indeed, I think that may have been the case. Colin Murray Boyles, who has been really rising up the draft boards the last several weeks here. He's been a little bit of a late riser, power forward / center from South Carolina, going north of the border. And again, let's talk about that a little bit. The fact that this is a guy that has really kind of shot up since the end of the season, which, again, to be honest with you, a lot of times I find that suspect, and I immediately kind of tend to be a little bit cynical and kind of say silly season when I see it happening.
Right, and what I would say too is that he just is one of these players that the scouts just love, very simply.
Mm-hmm.
He's a guy, great toughness, intriguing ability to make plays, is arguably the best cutter in this draft, can easily get to the basket. He shot like over 56% at South Carolina. Mm-hmm. But again, the big question with him is that stout defensively, can do everything well, terrible at shooting the three-pointer.
Sure.
It's usually not a great sign, Rick, when you're shooting 27% from three in college. That's really going to translate to the NBA. And again, it's interesting because for Toronto, I know, they still have Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett's another guy that they were looking to move potentially. So potentially this kind of feels like a reach for me, even though I know we've seen like mock drafts, essentially we're discussing that. Yeah. This is also in the range of of where it's supposed to go, around 8 to 12, essentially. But again, the real question is if he can develop a decent shot, he has the opportunity to be a great player at the pro level. The real question is, and I ask this honestly, is as we move towards a league where making three-pointers is a premium, if you have a guy on the floor who just can't make them, that's going to shrink the floor for your offense. And again, I'm very surprised just because there were a couple of guys that kind of fit the bill of sort of, just kind of guys that, at the end of the day, like Messiah Ujiri would like.
Yeah, and I question the pick at this point as far as I agree with you. I don't think it's a very high ceiling pick. And I don't think when you're picking 9th, I don't think we're already at the point of the guy's got a really high floor, though. I just think it's too early for that. It's one of those things where it's the fantasy football equivalent. And I was trying to think of this as you were talking here, who would be the guy that I would necessarily be thinking about? And I'll just, for lack of anybody else, and I hate to do one of my Tennessee Vols like this, but Cedric Tillman. If he gets drafted in the 12th round of one of my fantasy football leagues this year and everybody's going to groan, and then the person's going to be like, what do you want? It's the 12th round. I think it's a little early for that mentality, Ben Shue. I think it's a little bit early. It's the 9th pick. We don't care that the guy's going to shrink the floor. I don't think it's early enough to say that. Or late enough, I should say.
Look, and we've seen it too in today's NBA. defense is a premium. And there's no doubt that, in my opinion, that Murray Boyles can come into this league and play incredible defense.
Yes.
It's just the question's going to be is as the league tends to get bigger and taller, I don't fully know where his huge upside is going to be. If he turns out to be like the next coming of Draymond Green or the next coming of, Dennis Rodman, I feel like that's something that is definitely valuable in today's NBA. The real question is that in college, there's just a lot of times where he kind of disappeared, if I'm being brutally honest, if you look at the tapes of some of these games.
Yeah, and that's the thing, that like if you're going to be a specialist in this spot, you have to be a specialist essentially on that level. A Rodman, a Draymond Green, a Rudy Gobert, basically. Like you have to be at that elite level of being a specialist if you're not going to provide sort of all-around services to your team with the 9th pick. I think it's I
feel like it's a reach, but it could be a very measured reach if he pans out to be what they want him to be, essentially.
It could be. And, in terms of their particular roster construction, this is a thing where, again, they did need somebody that could play center. They needed somebody that could play point guard. And that's a thing where, again, in that sense, Jakasionis was right there. So you did have somebody in that spot that would not be a reach. If he were off the board at this point, I could kind of see that. But you've also got Maluk, who's maybe more, well, not maybe, he's definitely more of a true setter that you could put in that spot if they had made that pick there. Derek Queen from Maryland, I've seen mocks that have him going potentially as high as 9. He would not really be out of place. It's not like you would say you have to trade back to take him. Some of the other centers, you probably would have to trade back. Although arguably, I don't know, like Thomas Sorber from Georgetown, yeah, I mean, you could have taken him in this spot, I suppose, also, too. But, yeah, I mean, this is one of the ones where, again, going out on a limb, and if you're a team in a rebuilding situation, I mean, I think this kind of puts the lie to the notion that they were ever a serious player for Kevin Durant because, again, what would you have to make that happen in the first place with your roster? You almost assuredly have to part with Scotty Barnes, and then what does Durant have to play with when he gets to Toronto? But this is one of these things where, again, a pick like this shows that they see themselves as being in a prolonged rebuild, even in a weakened Eastern Conference, because this is not a guy with the upside to be able to help lift this franchise out of that in the next year or two.
Right, and again, this is again the one guy I feel in this draft that has like recognizable problems on tape. Yeah. And again, like this is a question where the scouts love a guy like this. Analytics are kind of a toss-up on him. Some can project him out to be a Draymond Green type guy, but in this case, I don't know. He's a very interesting prospect, but again, this feels like one of those silly season scenarios where GMs and scouts find a guy and just rocket him up. And essentially because of those workouts, he ends up getting a higher draft placement than during the early mock drafts, he wasn't really even in the lottery area at any level. So it's going to be really interesting because I don't want to harsh on the kid. He is a hard worker. He can make big plays. He can cut. He can get to the basket. Like it's not every day, Rick, that you see a guy at 6'7", 6'8" be like 56, 58% from
sure. Yeah.
So,
and
it feels like you're really hoping for him to be Draymond Green, and I really question if we're going to see another Draymond Green in the future.
I do feel personally bad to be saying these things here, but it's what I believe. It's what you believe. I mean, both of us kind of see it as going this way. And, isn't that interesting? Well, look at how the turntables have turned. Luke ends up going 10 to Houston. So
isn't it 10 to it's 10 to Houston, correct? Or is it 10 to Phoenix?
They're showing it as I see what it is. It's one of those deals where it's what a stupid NBA deal. Like if you make a deal ahead of time, it's still gonna like it says
I don't think that's official yet, but yeah.
Okay, because of that crap.
Look, I'll just double check because I was looking at it myself and I was like, that feels wrong. But
yeah, this is where again the NBA's got to get with the times here as far as who it ends up being.
So I think
in these spots.
Is it Houston? Maybe I'm just confused here at this point, Rick. Maybe I'm wrong.
I think it's so. Houston had made another deal.
Houston had made another deal. I think, yeah.
But that was, but I'm looking at this, and again, the fact that it was Phoenix's pick in this spot. I had Phoenix making the pick in the mock draft, so that is something where. Okay, so Maluk ends up being the selection here, and again, this is about where we thought he would go, certainly.
Yeah. And I mean, the most interesting question for just him overall is that one of the leading questions, and I think this was something that was a little bit discussed upon. It was in a CNBC article that he's in this timeline where he's from South Sudan, and obviously there's discussions about his visa, and just the NBA is going through that process of making sure that he can play basketball at this period of time. But it's just going to be, it's going to be, a very just unique situation there. But he's a great player, great rim protector. And I thought I was crazy, but I'm not crazy. So this pick is going to Houston. So this is going to be a interesting spot, because one thing that we did see from the Rockets last season in that first round series against Golden State was one of their big weaknesses was they didn't really have a lot of rim protection at the end of the day. And Mao can definitely do that, can definitely make some space. Arguably, probably the best shot blocker in this draft too. Mm-hmm. So it's just going to be it's an interesting pick if he stays in Houston. It's going to be, I assume he will, but again, there could always be more movement. There could always be picks moved in this draft too. It's also very possible that if Houston is making this selection, Rick, it could be a trade. It could be used as a trade chip in the future as well. So
it could be, and being a good rim runner is definitely a strong part of his game. It's very interesting. The two guys I talked about before, the alpha and beta males at the top of the Houston roster now, the way that it is constituted in terms of Durant and Sengun.
Okay, wait. I want to come back again. I'm going to figure this out, Rick, but I believe.
Proposed trade to Phoenix. Yeah,
it's going to Phoenix.
Okay, yeah.
Houston's picking him, but this is going to.
Okay, I was going to say him being a guy.
Again, everything's confusing, y'all.
I know. The NBA sucks with this stuff, man. I'm sick to death of this whole thing. So, and they're making him wear a Rockets cap for his interview. Like, this is so stupid. I was just about to say, I mean, in an alternate universe where this pick wasn't part of the Durant deal, what I was about to say was going to pan out. As far as, imagine this guy coming in to spell. You got Sengun, you got Durant, and this guy sort of, filling the other spot, subbing in there in those spots there. In terms of how it fits
in, quickly jump in for Phoenix, obviously one of the big issues they've been having recently is they just don't have an interior presence, and a guy like Mo can definitely do it. And now with a younger team with Jalen Green, Devin Booker, Matt Ishbia has had a rough start to his tenure as the Phoenix Suns owner, but this is a very lucky move for Phoenix here that Malik was be able to fall all the way to this spot.
Don't have an interior presence. Well, I apologize in advance to FDH Lounge dignitary Derek Allen for the crack that I'm about to make about his Suns. But imagine that. A team that passed on Luka Doncic to take Ayton number one back in 2018.
Well, like I said, they don't have a presence now, Rick. That's the difference.
Yeah. Finds themselves needing a center. You didn't take Luka, and you need a center now. How's that taste?
All I gotta say, I thought I was losing it there for a second.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh my goodness! From the perch in Portland, we're still trying to figure out who's going where now. These guys.
I was gonna say, so the mock draft that I did in the guide, clearly that was one where I factored it in after Houston's trade. Yeah. Now I had Phoenix taking Carter Bryant in this spot,
right?
Which would have made some degree of sense. Carter Bryant, I think we would both agree, probably gives you more upside than Maluk, I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, the real question, too, though, is that Bryant, during his time in Arizona, ironically enough, where he played his college ball, it's going to just be a very interesting – he was one of those late risers, too, Rick. He was not even listed on most mocks going into the mock drafts going into the season. So it's just Phoenix gets another interesting piece, and again, one thing we'll have to note too is that we're in the NBA, especially when you're in the Western Conference, you're going to have to deal with Wemby a lot. And Mikal is definitely a guy who can body him up and make some protect that rim area that the Western Conference is definitely going to need more of at this point.
But it's one of those things where it just feels like the delusion of the Phoenix franchise stemming from their idiot owner. That like, oh, we're still in it. We're still, like we traded Durant, but we're not tanking. We're still a good enough team to make the playoffs. That delusion, that's where you take a guy with a high floor like that instead of going for a guy with a higher ceiling, because they're delusional enough to think they're still in the mix to some degree. So they don't want to take the risk of like, well, what if the guy with the high ceiling turns out they have a lower floor? Then that'll keep us out of the playoffs next year. I got news for you, boys. You weren't making the playoffs next year anyways, but feel free to have your delusions. They're a play-in team, I would say.
Yeah, if Booker and Green can work well together, I think they can be.
Yeah, I think they're a play-in team.
Well, we've discussed this already. The Western Conference is going to be stacked next season.
Yeah, historically.
Now, and this may, in the short term, I feel like this is the right move because they were, I think they had gotten over having to deal with your use of Nurkic essentially being your main rim protector at that period.
Right. So, this is okay. The commissioner was basically, it seemed like he was reading the preamble to the Constitution for how long he was up there, but Cedric Howard ends up going to Portland. So very, very, very interesting after the deal that they just made, because, again, picking up Holiday to play in the backcourt seemed to position them as, and I think this is a little bit delusional too, as far as being more of trying to go for it right now, perhaps. I mean, how far are you going to be able to go with what that roster is at this point in time? But then this is a move where, again, I think that this is, although again, it's hard to say with Coward. Like, it's a thing where is it about what the ceiling is? Because everybody out there, all the hipsters that are saying that he should have been one of the top picks in the draft, I guess they're basing that on the ceiling. But then there's a lot of things that he does, fundamentally well that I think would position him as having a high floor. So I kind of don't know what to make of this. Like, I don't know how it fits into what Portland's looking to do.
Yeah, and it's also too, Rick, it's going to be interesting too, just because they have Shaedon Sharpe and they have Scoot Henderson and then Drew Holiday's coming in. So
yeah,
at some point, I think there was discussions, not necessarily with Portland, but someone was going to take Cedric Howard in this range of like back half of the lottery going into like picks 16 through 17, 16 through 18. But he's the draft's mystery man. Like, he has all the intangibles. He has the size. He can make shots. It's just, again, he's a guy who was playing D3 basketball only 3 years ago. And he's seen a lot of change and improvement. And again, I mean, for Portland, it's very potential. Like some of the other guys who were there, Asengi has now been dropping. As if Toronto's not going to take him, he's probably going to drop till later in the draft. And then if they weren't exactly happy with some of these other, picks at the end of the day.
Well, this just in, they're showing on TV proposed trade to Memphis.
Yeah,
so
that's what I'm seeing too now.
That makes a lot of sense because that could be your Desmond Bane replacement.
Yeah, so okay, I'm going to note this. So Coward, and this is from Jake L. Fisher on X, essentially, if I remember properly, from my minor remembrance of him overall. Just so the pick and the trade at this point looks like it's being reported as they're getting, Portland will be receiving the 16th overall pick, a future first rounder, and 2 second rounders in this deal. Okay, so one of the discussion on exactly what pick will that be, but we will see that as well. Probably out of the stock of what Memphis got from Orlando. From Jake Fisher from
okay. Okay, well, that's one of those things where, again, Portland better hope that Coward doesn't pan out at the level everybody seems to think, because that's going to be a bad move if so, because there's probably going to be a gap between him and what they're able to get at 16, because I think that's where a little bit of the fall off to the next level may transpire. But this is a situation where, again, if that trade goes through, this will break a streak for Cedric Howard, because going from Eastern Washington to Washington State to Portland, the man continued to move between spots where he could take an Uber between there and his next location. That will not be the case if he's going to Memphis.
Right. And at this point, too, it's going to be, Memphis is right now, Rick, in this weird timeline where they just traded Desmond Bane to Orlando.
Mm-hmm.
They're in a situation where I would not be shocked to see Ja or Jaren Jackson Jr. get traded.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a lot of weird situations with Memphis. And again, if they're looking for more talent, and again, to the real question I ultimately asked before, like, they probably targeted someone else in this draft and was just taking Coward for this deal specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And at one point, we need to also just consider that. And also for if this trade works out or doesn't work out for Portland, the real question is where that value of the second round pick is. And also, I did want to note, too, because I did see this come across the wire. Looks like Charlotte, according to the newsbreaker himself, Shams Charania, essentially, that Charlotte is trading Mark Williams to Phoenix for the 29th pick tonight and a future 2029 first round pick.
Okay.
So that's, again, I think, honestly, if you can tell now, when Phoenix got Maluk, they're just making moves to build some of the back line. So Phoenix, you see, Rick, I want to note this. I said it was slow on trade day, and here we go. More trades are coming.
Yeah, and again, 2029 first round pick from Phoenix. All I can say is look at Charlotte playing the long game, But by the way, we have a little bit of a phenomenon here that again, going back to NFL draft night. That was the first time that we did a live show of this nature. It was our coast-to-coast draft night extravaganza. This tonight is not coast-to-coast, albeit it is the North Coast to the West Coast, basically, and there's at least that.
I would argue, Rick, this is kind of the closest we're going to get.
Closest we're going to get. Closest we can get
it.
Yeah. We had 7 other folks on with us for that one here, and something we noticed that night, as they've gone to commercial on the TV broadcast here, is that we were able to get the picks in sometimes ahead of TV, of all things, by Wikipedia. And that phenomenon has repeated itself here and now. Now, I haven't hit refresh on Wikipedia that often, so perhaps it's happened before this and I've missed it. But according to Wikipedia, next up is the Chicago Bulls taking the aforementioned Noah Asengbe, the power forward from France, which, all things being equal, kind of feels like a Bulls pick, does it not?
I mean, in a way it is, but he is probably one of the most intriguing players in this draft, if that is the case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whoever that rogue individual is trying to update Noah Asengbe too.
Yeah.
We're getting silly season already, Rick. So, but he is honestly, and I've discussed this with him overall, he's probably the most interesting guy. Mm-hmm. So he plays overseas in Germany. He was honestly playing in their essential championship at this period of time in that region against Bayern Munich. And he came over, Ben Saroff, who could be a later pick in this draft, stayed. Mm-hmm. So he is kind of a mystery man. I know he did some workouts with Toronto. I know he did some workouts. There was some discussion that he may have gone to Brooklyn. There was also some rumors that someone had potentially promised him Toronto as well, but it's going to be it's just really, I don't know. I'm kind of just in my head thinking like he is a very interesting prospect right now. And it's just very hard to tell like where he is at the end of the day. You know what I mean?
Yeah. If he is the most interesting man in the 2025 NBA draft, does this mean we'll be seeing him in a beer commercial someday?
Yeah. I mean,
that is possible. And, it's funny because again they're still dragging it out on TV as far as what it's going to be. Yeah. I'm gonna laugh my nards off if that does end up being the correct pick here.
Right, and there's also now I'm hearing rumors that the Atlanta Hawks are going to be trading their pick.
Here we go. Noah Asengbe. What that means is I need to hit refresh right now to find out if the 13th pick has been posted yet. It has not been. It is interesting to note that on the aforementioned NFL draft night when we did this coast to coast, somewhere driving across the Midwest of America, FDH Lounge original dignitary Chris Galloway. That was a hilarious visual with him. I remember him chiming in at one point when I noted this about Wikipedia. I remember him saying, Rick, that's somebody backstage at Lambeau Field. Somebody backstage is feeding this to Wikipedia. So that's his theory anyways. One wonders if Chris, if you're listening here tonight, hit us up. Do you think it's the same
I also
thing?
hear like I know we coast to coast because I know we got some people in Chi-Town. We got some people in the East Coast, New York City, Boston. I know Scout Kim Bex is probably randomly listening at periods of time as well. So, I mean, one thing I did want to say too about Asengi though, Rick, is that he's an interesting prospect. He's 6'10". He can make some big plays. The real question for him when he was playing in the BBL was essentially his consistency. There were also a time like you would watch some tape on him where he would get boxed out pretty easily. But again, he's a young player, so it might take some time overall, but it's going to be more like he is the second youngest player. And the one thing that he is also good at is he can make plays on defense. He is a plus defender.
Yes.
And as we see with what Chicago is now building with that young core, including with Matt Massel's probably being the most notable player there right now. Mm-hmm. They're going to be continuing to be a very interesting team. We'll see if they're able to build off of that success they had later in the season. So,
yeah, that will be worth noting, definitely. And as far as it goes with him, this is one of those things where, to go back to what we were talking about before with Igor Demin coming over and playing at BYU, it was posited in that story that I referenced before. I think it was on CBSSports.com. That what we're seeing with Demin represents the leading edge here. And again, you go back all the way to probably even further back, but Olo Candy going to, I think, what was it, Pepperdine or wherever it was. And he came out of there in 98, I think. Like, we've had international players coming to the NBA for a long, long, long time. The aforementioned Lauri Markkanen came in over and played at Arizona. But in the era of NIL, that the Euro leagues are going to get sucked of the top guys more than ever because of the NIL money in America. It was posited in that article. And I do think that's going to happen. I do think that you're going to see that, and that guys like Noah Asenge, where we have to kind of squint and like, I don't know, how does he kind of measure up based on whatever? I don't think we're going to have to do that nearly as much anymore, particularly, and that more programs like BYU are going to be moving to that quasi-pro model because of the NIL situation. So it is interesting that, like, we have that in this year's draft. Maybe we'll have that, a little bit of that next year. But I think the days of having to sort of equate what these Euro prospects look like and having to kind of squint a little bit there, I don't think we're going to have to do as much of that in the future. I think the comps will be a little bit more apples to apples.
Right, and we're going to, and one thing I did want to note before we head to Atlanta, which this pick will be going to, I just want to double check, because I believe this pick will be going to, this pick is going to New Orleans.
Okay.
So they're coming. That will be New Orleans. Apparently, again, just double checking. I'm seeing rumors that they're also including an unprotected pick as well. I believe New Orleans is going to be sending Atlanta 2026 as well. But one thing to note too, and this was a very interesting story I saw earlier. That I believe this was on in the front office sports newsletter. Kudos to the team over there. They do fantastic work.
Yes.
That we saw a lot of guys who had declared early for the NBA draft combine, and Georgia was drafted overall. And a lot of guys pulled out because of the NIL money. And there was less than only a couple hundred guys when I believe it started with over 410 guys declared for the NBA draft. And now, because of that ability, you now can stay in college and stay at those facilities and hone your game a little bit better. And if you're not guaranteed a top 13 or top 20 draft slot, you're better off probably staying in college at this point, to be totally honest.
Yes, I agree with that. I think it's similar to, in the NFL, the only position that you can say that about, and I've gone out on a limb and said this, I think at some point there will be a running back, a star running back who decides to stay in college because of the situation in the NFL, and at first contracts for running backs are never really that great, and teams are reluctant to sign big extensions for second ones. The Saquon Barkley situation may change that a bit, perhaps. But you'll see that. I think you're right about that in terms of the ability to pay college players, and if they're not going to be super high picks here. For what it's worth, in this spot, Wikipedia is saying that Derek Queen, the center from Maryland, will be the pick here. So,
and this should have, and this again, there was some discussion at 7, and this really shouldn't shock anyone because, Rick, do you want to know who their current GM is at this period of time?
refresh my memory.
It's Troy Weaver, and
That's
guess where
right.
Troy Weaver's from? Maryland.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
okay.
I mean, and again, Queen, actually, I mean, in earlier mocks, he was a top 10 guy, so this isn't too surprising.
Right.
But he also is one of those guys who can make plays, has a lot of tools like a big guy needs in today's NBA, very simply enough.
Yeah.
Can make he doesn't have that range yet from 3, but he's just based off of what during the time he had at Maryland, his shot doesn't look terrible. It's a it's a pretty good jump shot. So I do feel like for New Orleans, this is another guy that they can add to the mix. And again, he was a guy that Troy Weaver allegedly coveted. There was a rumor earlier this week that he was a guy that he was looking at, and if there was a way to essentially move up now to get him, it makes a lot of sense. And again, the real question too, and this is a huge thing for Atlanta too. We know they're rebuilding. I know they got Kristaps Porzingis from Boston. That 2026 pick, which is being reported at least right now, is being unprotected. Could turn into something notable at some point, especially if New Orleans, especially depending on the rights surrounding that unprotected pick.
Right. It very well could. Derek Queen is the pick. Wikipedia 2 for 2, and there are scoops that I have reported from them thus far. So yeah, like you said, Derek Queen. This is somebody that was thought by many.
I don't mean to interrupt, Rick. I just want to
go ahead.
double check here. So it looks like I'm just judging from potential picks. It looks like the pick that would be going to the Atlanta Hawks in 2026, it would be the most favorable of either a potential New Orleans pick or a pick for Milwaukee. So in most cases, I feel like that's going to be a New Orleans pick.
Yeah.
But it almost feels like, too, that at the end of the day, again, if Milwaukee trades Giannis at some point, that pick could also be coveted. So I feel like unless Derek Queen turns into a solid rotational player, I think this is a very good trade by the Atlanta Hawks.
A New Orleans pick, again, for as little faith as I have in the kind of season that they're going to have upcoming. I mean, that to me, it's almost reminiscent of that old jingle, "What would you do for Klondike Bar?" I would substitute in New Orleans first round pick in that jingle.
I feel like also too, like I got at this point, it's like all the stats are coming in right now, man. So I'm just like, we kicked off the trade scenario, and now we're getting close to silly season. So one thing I did want to just quickly recap, Rick, at this period of time, like, I know right now we have moved to San Antonio beyond the clock.
Mm-hmm. At the end of the
lottery.
line,
add some names that are still on the clock right now. Would that make a lot of sense?
Yeah, and I think as far as this tier of talent goes, guys who are expected to go in this spot before we start getting into the players that are interchangeable between now and the end of the first round, and we're not far from that point. Mm-hmm. But the couple of names that I'm looking at here that I think probably might very well have gone already in an alternate universe and probably won't be going much lower than this. Certainly the aforementioned Carter Bryant, the forward from Arizona. I think that's a guy that could go any pick now. I think potentially Liam McNeely, the small forward from UConn, that's a guy that I think a lot of people have going more or less in this range. And the international pick here, but from Illinois, the Akamo guard, Kasparis Chekasionis, I could see him going in there. So these are guys that I would think might be going in the next 3 picks. They probably won't be because the GMs are starting to mix it up a little bit more, but those are the guys that I would think would be going 1, 2, 3.
And if we're talking, Rick, sorry if I'm interrupting.
No,
we're talking we're on San Antonio right now, and one guy who has been going up is Jon Beringer.
Yes.
The center from France at 6'11". He's a good young guy. He played in the Adriatic League over the Western, but again, he's still very young, and but he did play a significant role in the Euro Cup. So he's one of those guys that it's going to be interesting. And another guy who we haven't really talked about yet, but this is more of a guy who is an upswing guy too. Thomas Sorber from Georgetown. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, he's not going to play in summer league due to a toe injury, but he's one of those guys that I feel like could be a really good rotational player for a lot of NBA teams.
Yeah, and if you believe the whole notion that Wemby would like them to get a true center who can log a number of minutes next to him and allow him to play the four, I mean, Sorber fits the best by far out of anybody at this point for that spot.
And the one thing too that it's insane when I was reading about him overall, he has a wingspan. Like again, we do a wingspan. Second mention of the night.
Yeah,
but it's insane. 7'6". He's Rick. It's not often you see a guy. His standing height is 6'9", and he has a wingspan of 7'6".
Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible, really. And again, for San Antonio, a franchise that again needed to upgrade at the forward spots here, the pick that they are making, according to Wikipedia, will certainly help. Carter Bryant, the small forward from Arizona. We'll see if the commissioner ratifies that in real time. But that is the pick that Wikipedia says. Score another one for Wikipedia
as well. I mean, one thing too is that during his time at Arizona, and it's not really surprising because he was, again, like I know he wasn't on a lot of the mock drafts to start, but he over the last month and a half has been a guy that a lot of scouts have loved. And in a way too, like the analytics, because he is an incredibly versatile player and he can do a lot of things well. But again, the real question is this more hype from the scouts that he's going to be a great player, or is this more just a guy who's just like, he'll be a nice fit with San Antonio overall in their rotation. But to be honest, at least for them, they didn't pick another guard, so it feels like it makes a lot of sense for them, especially. I have a feeling someone like either Vassell or Keldon Johnson is probably going to get traded at some point in the next year or two.
You got to think so.
So I feel like this is another young guy they can pair with Wemby, and he's like, I mean, and we know this, like the San Antonio Spurs in the Pop, even though I know Pop has moved from being a coach going to the front office. Mm-hmm. This is kind of their guy, sort of their prototypical, like does a lot of things well. Like again, I wouldn't say it like this because he's a different player, but does have some sort of semblance to me of a Kyle Anderson type guy who just knows how to play the game. And I think the real question is that was he living up to his potential at Arizona because his team was really good around him? Uh-huh. Could he take the next step, or could he take another step at this period of time?
That's very interesting. Yeah, because again, by the way, for what it's worth, we commented on this a little bit on draft night as far as some of the sartorial splendor here. Mr. Bryant going with the maroon suit, but like sans shirt. An interesting choice.
Interesting move. Yeah.
It's bold and it's daring.
Thing, Rick. I'm
kind of, yeah. So. A little bit, yeah, a little bit of that. But as far as, and I'm looking up to see where he played his college ball, because there's a comp here in terms of with him, not necessarily stylistically, but in terms of upside, in terms of San Antonio taking a guy that could play small forward, and I'm looking to see here where this gentleman played his college ball, because if I'm right and it was Arizona, then it's going to show you how aspirational it was with them making this pick here. But and doggone it, I'm not finding it here in real time. But I'll just ask you, where did Sean Elliott play his college ball?
I believe, unless I'm incorrect, I thought he played his college ball at Arizona.
Okay, so that's a comp.
Sure he did, but
yeah. There it is on Wikipedia.
Is,
like, if you're a Spurs fan right now, you're really going, man, I hope lightning strikes twice, because that's
the one thing I will note for him too is that I personally think that, especially for a team like San Antonio that's building around Wemby and building around this talented young roster. It makes a lot of sense, because I don't think they necessarily need a lot more scoring right now. They just need a guy who can play within a system and make big plays when needed.
But he can get you the scoring. I mean, that's somebody where
because that's the thing too. And I feel like out of courtesy to San Antonio and for Bryant, I feel like this is the right spot for him to be.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of discussion I heard that he could even get into the top 10. I'm like, that was some interesting talk at that point, but I kind of felt like it was a little interesting just in general.
That is interesting. So that thus ends the lottery. We come up to Oklahoma City at 15, and I will say, in something that would have been in an alternate universe, now there's just contingent on two things happening. What would have been a nightmare for anybody trying to contend with Oklahoma City over the next several years, a team that won 68 games and the NBA championship. A guy that was getting mocked to them a little bit at 15, if he was still on the board, was Cedric Coward. I mean, imagine if they took him and he becomes what people think he could become. It's all over for the league, man. We might have dodged the big bullet.
And my thing, too, is like if you're looking at players who are still available on the board, like Behringer, who I had seen mocked to San Antonio as a perfect fit for them. Jaquionis from is it Jaquionis or Jaquionis? I just need.
I've heard it both ways.
I've seen it so many ways. So, but again, I will put this out there. Another guy that no one's really talked about, but there was some discussion, and he was mocked to Oklahoma City in a couple of the mocks. I saw Jace Richardson from Michigan State.
Yep,
it's a guy that is still available. And again, as we know, the issue for OKC is not about their draft pick or their draft capital. It's just more like if you're looking sort of down the line for them, there's in the next 2 to 3 years, they're going to have to make some financial decisions just in terms of how the salary cap looks. And then you're going to see two guys with rookie extensions, very simply, Rick. So
you are. And in looking at it here,
Shane's
too.
going to have to get a Supermax. So there's a lot. This is the time where Presti needs to use his picks to get value players.
And in terms of Shea, if you take a Jace Richardson, is that a guy who could be impactful enough to basically keep the usage down a little bit for SGA? That's a point right there. It's like that's a real luxury to worry about, but they're in a spot where they can do that. They can be focused on that, even though it's a luxury. I mean, it is something where any championship team would love to be able to do that with their best players, to be able to keep the usage a little bit more sane.
And I would also say too, Rick, there were two guys also still a little bit deeper down in terms of best available that could also be good fits for them. That would be Alcin Newell of Georgia. And a guy that they could probably do a little bit of draft and stash, Hugo Gonzalez from Spain's been rising up for the European players. So
yes, could do that. And again, the guy that I've got going in our mock draft, Pro Hoops Draftology 2025, available on the main page at fantasydrafthelp.com. I've got them, and this is a little bit of a roll of the dice. He only goes this high in so many mock drafts out there. Danny Wolf, the center out of Michigan, who is a very tantalizing prospect and a guy who still requires a little bit of development, but somebody who is when you talk about trends in the pro game and you talk about playmaking from the pivot, Danny Wolf is one of those guys.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's a thing where, and they were able to use to a certain extent and you saw it a lot in the finals here in terms of where Hartenstein was able to make an impact. Danny Wolf could come in and do that from day one. He couldn't do everything Hartenstein does from day one, but he could do that from day one. So that's a very interesting thing as well here. I continue to think that this is that these picks here in the first round are the perfect opportunity for Oklahoma City to start to plan for a post-Hartenstein future, because he's the one guy you can look at and you're like, yeah, his contract is going to price himself out of OKC. Now, again, we'll see. It could also be just continuing to accrue more wings, which is what they've done over a period of time, and you can't say it hasn't worked for him.
Right. And again, too, if Jaquionis could be the pick here from Illinois, it would fit that sort of playmaker that Oklahoma City kind of at times lacked during the playoff run. Like, essentially, Shea's a great player. Cason Wallace is a great player. But if there is a guy that can, and I know Nikola Topic is also a guy that's also listed as a guy that could be making a huge impact there after he recovers from his ACL surgery. It's going to be very interesting to see where they go with here. And then subsequently, Portland's coming up now with Memphis's pick. It's going to be interesting to see where they go as well.
That's right. And while I was wrong about Danny Wolf, I will say I told you so for a position. Thomas Sorber, part of the post-Hartenstein future. Yep. And again, a guy where he requires, some development. There's some areas, primarily defensively, where he's pro ready from day one. But what a great situation they have there. What kind of a better situation? A guy that can play behind Hartenstein for the next 2 seasons here. You got all the time in the world basically to try to get this guy ready. It's the perfect spot for them. They did the very smart thing. As a Cavs fan, I hate to see it because I hate to see them maximizing their opportunities as a fan of a fellow contender, but I take my hat off to them. They did the right thing because that's the one hole that you have upcoming. The other spots it's speculative as far as who might stay, who might go. You're going to lose this guy. Much as I hate to see it, I take my hat off to them. They did the right thing.
And I would say at this point, too, the smart thing for them to do just moving forward is just give him as much time and space. And especially they do a great job with their G League program with the Oklahoma City Blues. So there's an opportunity for them overall.
Yeah.
To let him play in the G League and get to the spacing. And again, too, I think we agree that right now the biggest weakness for Oklahoma City, if they have any weaknesses after winning a championship, is their interior defense at times during the finals was a little lacking. And a guy like Sorbo, who is a little undersized but has that vertical reach to block shots and make plays, could be something very interesting.
Yeah, 2.0 blocks per game in college. So he's a guy that is going to, that's a little bit of a metal rod inside there that you need as far as stiffening up that interior defense. But so that's a thing where he just and a guy who can be a pretty good rim runner at this stage of the game here as well. And as far as his build goes, 6'10", 265, and somebody that is, I think, perfectly situated. I mean, I think Danny Wolf would have been as well. It's a little bit of a different skill set on what you would have gotten from both of these guys here. But Oklahoma City definitely did the right thing in that spot there. And if you're a fan of any other contender, you can't be happy with that because it just shows that they're getting ready for what comes next. They're already looking down the road here and being able to replace Hartenstein in a far more economical kind of a way, to replace him with a guy on a rookie contract. And by the way, I'm going to go further out on a limb and say they got the 24th pick. They may not have taken the last center in this round. And even if they did, they haven't taken the last center that they're going to take this year or next year or the year after. Yeah. That's what they're going to do. You basically throw enough darts at the board, and one of these guys is going to emerge and be able to fill that role. When you have all of these picks, you can afford to play the numbers game. For as much as I'm skeptical about that and the accrual of all of these endless picks, and I kind of always goof on that a little bit because, again, most of the success they've had has been from having poor records and drafting high. It is something where once you're at this stage of evolution, you've won a title, you got to prepare to lock down your key pieces. This is where the picks really matter because filling out the rest of your rotation, and particularly the one hole that you have that's upcoming 2 years from now, you just play a numbers game with these picks. So like you said, their developmental system has been excellent. That's part of why they are where they are right here. Because again, now SGA, he was acquired in a trade, but even he wasn't, a first, second, third, fourth, fifth pick, etc. Neither was Jalen Williams. So you're looking at a situation where these guys are just able to come in here and continue to draft guys in different spots and be able to get something out of it. So the odds of being able to get what they need out of Sorber or the next guy that they draft to play center or the next guy, it'll be one of those guys, and it'll be on a rookie contract as opposed to the $29 million for Hartenstein.
Right, and again, we saw again the whole movement of this whole acquire draft capital. I mean, this goes back to the NFL timeline more of the 80s 49ers, the 90s Cowboys, and we saw Sam Hinkie attempt to do it with Philly. But it does if you go on a logical narrative, Rick, at least, you would assume that if you get enough meaningful picks, even if they're later in the draft, in the first round, you're going to get a good player eventually. It's again, like you said, if you have enough darts to throw at the dartboard, you have a very good chance of not necessarily becoming, but finding a guy who can stick in your rotation at least 9 times out of 10. That's
right. And they're going to get what they need out of one of these picks here. It will definitely happen. And you come to, again, what on paper, thanks NBA, is the Memphis pick at 16, which we know in reality is the Portland pick. So in terms of what they might do in that spot, I mean, they've been busy little bees the last couple of days here. And I will say the Anthony Simons pick, I trade, I don't get that at all. Like, you know,
Yeah,
you decide to
it's an
bail out the
interesting
Celtics.
situation.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's like, as much as I said the Pau Gasol trade to the Lakers should have been vetoed years ago, I almost kind of think the same thing about this trade. But I know the league is not really in the. Of course, they only veto trades on teams where they own the team, as was the case with Chris Paul.
Right.
But
I mean,
you know,
at least for now, I would assume that Yakianos is probably going to be the pick here. We could see someone
another
a little bit out of
guard.
the field. I wouldn't rule that out at this period of time.
Well,
but it almost feels like Portland did this either because Memphis really wants Cedric Howard, or they felt like they could get their guy at pick 16 instead of pick 11.
The one thing that would make sense, because I think he could be looking in the same ballpark potentially as Cedric Howard in terms of upside, is if the pick ends up being Liam McNeely, the small forward out of UConn, because I think that fills a positional need for them. I think that's a guy that, you know, you could justify trading back the 5 spots because you're getting a guy that, again, a lot of scouts are hyped about his upside in the same way that they are with Cedric Howard. So that's one that would be very interesting. For as dubious as I am about them trading out of the Coward pick, if they end up getting him, you know, a couple picks later, plus getting another first-round pick, then I could see my way a little more clear to it, I suppose.
Yeah, and again, too, like we're in the point of the draft, too, Rick, where we're looking more at acquiring assets for a lot of these teams. You know?
Yeah.
And again, too, we've seen like the graphs and we've seen like how the value of early first round picks has sort of declined over the last decade and a half. So.
Yeah. And well, whoa, this is if Wikipedia is to be believed, and I'm thinking Wikipedia got hacked because this is, I didn't see this guy going in the first round in a single mock draft, and we're only at pick 16. Yang Hansen, the center from China.
Yeah.
Like, is that? I mean, is there a universe where this is happening?
I mean, it's potentially true. I mean, one thing there is discussion that he was rocketing up. There was a guy that I remember I targeted earlier on during our mock draft show, I guess, but it didn't really qualify.
Draft lottery show, yeah.
A draft lottery show, yeah. And yeah, no, it looks like that would be Hansen Yang from China. Yes, correct. This again feels like a reach, but he was a guy that had a very good scouting essentially a great draft combine, and is kind of a guy who had a very interesting time in the CBA. And he does, again, he has an incredible, again, we're going to say it, wingspan, 3.
Sure.
So this feels like a reach for Portland here.
It is. 16 for a guy that wasn't going in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, but I also understand, too, because if they feel like if he's a guy they can pair with Donovan Clingan, kind of makes sense. Okay. But I do also wonder, too, like, I don't really understand why they would necessarily trade this pick, because it almost feels like very similar to how Atlanta traded back with New Orleans. They could have just done this deal with New Orleans, right?
They could have, yeah.
They could have. I mean, they probably could have gotten Yang at around 26. But again, we're in silly season now, so this isn't truly surprising. But again, he has a high motor, great player, great rebounder. It's
pretty shocking to me.
Again, I mean, if they're trying to do Twin Towers with him and Clingan, it could make a lot of sense.
A guy that was going, for example here, 34 to Charlotte in the NBA Draft.net mock draft. I'd love to hear the pitch in the draft room from the scouts. Here's my pitch. Put him in there with Clingan. It's like the Twin Towers, but half the offense. You know, I mean,
but one thing we have to know:
what are we doing here?
A role at the CBA too, Rick. So I feel like this is either going to be a very Portland pick, or this is going to be a very good pick. It's a tough call here. And again, we've also known this too, and the point I was making before we transitioned into that pick. A lot, if we're being totally honest, Rick, if we look at picks 16 through 30 in the end of the first round, a lot of these guys, to be totally honest, they don't pan out.
Well, again, when I said before, there's a handful of guys that were projected to go by the end of the lottery, and there's still a couple of them on the board. And then you've got the guys that seem pretty interchangeable from, say, maybe about 15 to about 28. He's not even in that projected tier. Yeah. I mean, he's in the next tier down, and that might be generous. So this is the thing. It would be hilarious. It would be the most Portland thing ever that for the high-profile whiffs that they've had on centers, from Sam Bowie to Greg Oden to whatever, to spend a fraction of the draft capital on a guy that turns out to be a big star. I mean, that would be pretty funny.
The only reason I would even make this argument that he could be a really good player is that he showed out at the scouting combine. He played exceptionally well and has a great standing reach too. And again, too, the real question I think for Portland is that they're in this sort of transition phase of like they're trying to compete for a playoff berth in the West. And it feels like, too, that this is one of those picks very similar to the Murray Boyles pick earlier in this thing. That if you're drafting based off of potential, they have unlimited potential. The problem is, and I tend to agree with you, this was an overslotted pick here. But again, this is the timeline, and I know this was going to happen at some point, Rick.
Right.
Whether now or a little bit later, we're going to see one or two guys that none of the mocks have even discussed as the pick within that range. It's just sooner than we were even expecting at this period of time. And to note, too, I will note, it's like with that Portland trade, they also did pick up again, to defend them just a little bit, they did pick up a future first-round pick. And now it's being, essentially, I'm getting the update now, it's being conveyed from Orlando in 2028. Which I'm going to assume is going to be a low pick, but still a first-round pick.
Okay. Well, you look at this, and it's a thing where, as much as FDH Lounge dignitary John Adams and I are always joking with one another about, the profile never lies. Okay, the profile on me, one of the things is that I'm a big hooer for upside, but even I'm crapping on this pick. I mean, what does that tell you? I mean, if Rick Morris is saying, yeah, the guy's got a lot of upside, but taking him at 16, that's when you want to look in the mirror.
The thing I'm more puzzled by is that seeing the other trade that Atlanta made with New Orleans, I'm pretty sure he would have been there available at 23rd.
Yep. And
probably would have been, because he, again, like you said, was not on anyone's mock. But again, I like to use this rule. If they felt like he was the guy, he was the guy. But again, we've discussed this. Reaches do happen in the NBA draft.
Yeah. Well,
anyway,
and
like I said, the palatial estate in Portland. We'll see if we'll see what happens. But again, this is also a plain scenario that I've mentioned before too, Rick. There's always one or two guys in the first round of the NBA draft in like recent memory that scouts love and someone picks every time.
That's right.
So it shouldn't be surprising, but it's going to be really interesting. So another guy we were just talking about just went to Minnesota. Was the guy that I had slotted for San Antonio, Joe Beringer, who's another one of those guys very similar to Hanson Yang, who's still a project guy. We don't really know a lot about him. He did play well in the Adriatic League, so it's going to be very interesting. Now, I do want to ask this question because I don't want to put us into a situation going back on a Portland pick. But the one thing that I am now very intrigued to see, Rick, moving forward is that Yang did very well at the scouting combine.
Okay.
And now I'm wondering if this is going to be a scenario where some guys because every year there's holdouts for the scouting, for the pro combine.
Mike Mamula.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And but here's my rule: like, there's going to be a handful of guys who don't do it now. I'm saying if you were projected a late second rounder, can get yourself up to a mid first round pick. I do wonder if the scouting combine, at least for the NBA, might get a little more intrigued because of this situation now. That a guy somehow played himself from a second round to a first round pick, essentially. Or he wasn't even listed in the mid second round for a while.
Yeah. I mean, that really is again, him shooting up to where he got to tonight is
I mean he wasn't late. In most of the mocks I saw, he was a mid to late second round pick. But again, he had that great combine, and we have seen before too where scouts get enamored with a player, and they want to build. And the question I think also too for Portland is that they have also guys like Jeremy Grant and they'll have holidays, so they'll get money off the books. And again, it seems to me, at least for what the Trailblazers are doing, they're intentionally going very distinctly with defense. And again,
they are.
Yang's still not the greatest defender at this point, but it's going to be a really intriguing scenario. But to go back to Minnesota, obviously the Behringer pick, I thought he was going to go to San Antonio potentially, but it's not surprising with them. Obviously, Naz Reid and Julius Randle are both in a contract re-up scenario. Yeah. So they are protecting themselves a little bit if they get priced out of either one of them.
Yeah, and if you're a raw French big man
for them in the near short term, and can kind of, because one thing, and we will note this too, Rudy Gobert is getting up there in age.
Yes,
and getting a defensive center for Anthony Edwards makes a lot of sense.
As a raw French big man, getting to play with and learn from Rudy Gobert, I mean, that is something right there. I will say also, too, on a sartorial note, I was having to look this up on Pro Football Reference from draft night here. I believe it was, not that they list fashion on here, but I was forgetting who Green Bay had picked. Green Bay picked Matthew Golden, and I believe that he was wearing a really, really swank lavender suit, as Joan Behringer was just wearing just a second ago here. I don't think it was the same one. He's a tad taller than Matthew Golden, but same along the same lines. I was actually just talking about this with lounge dignitary Matt Patrone in the last week or so here, so he's probably not watching tonight. I'll have to tell him, hey, Matt, there was another guy in a really swank lavender suit last night, but so props to him for that. I'm a big fan of that. I'm a fan of the fashion flair that he's showing. And again, I mean, he's a guy where, he's toolsy, but he's a little bit kind of raw, but the ability to kind of, learn and develop there in Minnesota, it's a good situation for him to be in, I think.
Right. And I feel like, too, Rick, one of the bigger things that we're going to start to see from Minnesota is that they're going to have to start fortifying their back line. Like, it feels like their guard play right now is pretty solidified, and then we'll see what Rob Dillingham can definitely bring this team.
Yeah.
With a little bit more with just a little bit more time. So
I
do feel like, it's been a little bit of history, though. I did want to bring this up because I am a history dude.
Okay.
With Yang getting picked, he is the first Chinese draft pick in the NBA since Zhao Qi in 2016 to Houston.
Okay.
Drafted in the second round. Or what I like to call Summer League legend, Zhang
Qi. Yes. And that, that's true. There have not been a lot of them.
I will say this too, again, I know we've discussed from the Perkins in Portland. I will say now that Portland Summer League team is going to be very interesting to watch.
It is going to be. And that's the thing where, and this is where, I mean, as we look in different sports here, different things that kind of pop out in marathon running, isn't it primarily Ethiopians that tend to do well and everything like that? So it's like with China, why is it primarily big men? At least the big men that we remember that come to the NBA, right? I don't get that. There must be a reason.
It's been very hard for any guards and all that too. But again, we saw last year. Yuki Watanabe play for Memphis and did well in Yuki Kiwamura, excuse me. I want to say Watanabe sometimes.
Well, you're just showing off.
Another basketball player with Watanabe as the last name. But Yuki came in last year for Memphis, had some fun spot run for them. But it's to go back to the newer train of thought with Minnesota. They're doing, I think, it's a good idea for them. They can draft and stash him, and then hopefully if they don't choose to leave him overseas, he can definitely play on a G League team and definitely learn from Rudy Gobert. And again, another notable French player off the board. We've seen, what is it now? I think 5 now in the last 2 drafts.
Yeah. And there's going to be more here. Certainly at some point in the first round, the point guard, Nolan Traore, probably will be going at some point. So you have that to look forward to as well. So, again, some players continuing to drop.
Yeah, and I'm a little I'm not totally shocked, but I am a little shocked that Giannis is the only one, because he was pretty much mocked in a lot of these mock drafts from between.
He was going in the top 7 in some of the mocks I was looking at.
He's all the way down 15 there.
Yeah.
And again, at least from my knowledge, just Chase, in terms of like the draft nicks out there wasn't anything being discussed negatively about him either. So
no, I didn't see anything.
I feel like
no.
one of these teams, I feel like I will be shocked if Washington doesn't take him, because he's another guy who could be a secondary playmaker
for
that offense. So again, like, I'm surprised, but there is one thing I did hear about too in the discussion really also too is that was his time at Illinois, was it a little bit of a flash in the pan? Was it, it's just a tough call for certain guys, especially when you only play 1 year in college. And, Illinois had an interesting season, I'm going to say.
Yeah.
So again, it's not as good. Or this, again, like, another guy that we talked about earlier on, Mike McNeely from UConn, was definitely a guy who can go in this spot right now.
Yeah, like there's a couple of guys that have dropped that, at this point in time, the drop has been, I think, greater than what we would have expected it to be. And that always happens in the draft. That is a thing where, again, I did think potentially that could happen to somebody that it didn't happen to at this point. I thought Asenge could go as low as 21 at Utah. He was one of those guys where there was quite a range.
It bounced around. So I'm getting a report right now that it looks like Walter Clayton Jr. is going to be going to is initially going to Utah, but I'm also seeing Shams is reporting that Utah is going to send that pick. Washington is drafting Walter Clayton for Utah, and then Utah is going to get the 21st pick.
Okay.
So I'm seeing Michael Clayton. I'm seeing at this point Walter Clayton Jr. is probably going to the Washington Wizards at this period of time. So, he is going to be
Wizards
drafted by Washington and then traded
to Utah. And that's where,
an interesting spot for him as well.
And that's where, again, looking at this here, it's always fun to put the puzzle pieces together, context clues. Like if they're taking Clayton, does that make it more likely that they're hanging on to Bailey? Like we're ready to start trying to win again?
There was a report by ESPN. I think I saw CBS was also trying to confirm it too. Bailey was not exactly happy. Like you noted during the his live drafting that it was not on one of his preferred lists.
Right.
So we will see what happens. But
like, I don't, and this is a weird thing to say because I don't know that anybody considers him to have a super high ceiling, but unless Utah really thinks that they can continue to lose with having good but not great players, like Walter Clayton to me is a guy that you draft when you're getting ready to try to win. Like I thought I would have been really pissed if he went to Orlando. I would have been throwing things at the TV if he went to Orlando because he would really help. I feel like they could use a little bit more true playmaking, and he's a guy that knows how to win. But it's like if he goes to Utah, if they're going to try and be another 18-win team, then why are you taking him? He, to me, is almost sort of the equivalent of Jordi Fernandez as a coach. Like I'm not saying Jordi Fernandez is a much better coach than Clayton is a player, but you know what I'm saying. You don't want anybody that can raise the floor of a team if you're trying to tank. So it's like it almost makes me think that they're going to keep Bailey and that they think it's time to start trying to actually build and let go of the pipe dream of number one in 2026. Maybe I'm adding the pieces together wrong, but it's fun to speculate right now.
I know. And also to note with this deal too, Utah also sent multiple second-round picks to Washington. So very quietly, I want to say so far, Rick, like we haven't talked winners and losers yet.
Okay.
But I think Washington's doing a very good job with their draft right now.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's going to depend on what they do with the pick here. But, I mean, they, fitting Trey Johnson into that rotation definitely helps. It definitely raises their floor. And, Clayton going to Utah is really interesting to me because.
Yeah. Well, I mean, no, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I just was going to say, they've got a crowded backcourt as it is. It's not that any of those guys are going to keep him away from getting minutes here, but like, I don't see what the purpose is if you're going to be another bad team. But again, as we said before, they're the most unconventional, horrible team of all time because it's not a horrible team on paper. And it's one of those things where I guess Utah kind of stands. I think they're almost kind of a cautionary tale when we start talking about how the league is evolving and the role of depth and everything like that. And you got to have 10 guys out there that can make an impact. Well, I guess the lesson of Utah is you better not neglect 1, 2, and 3 out of the 10 because they've got a I'm not going to say really good, but they've got a good starting lineup. They've got a good rotation. They've got a good 1 through 10. They just don't really have a 1, a 2, or a 3. And in this league, that's enough to make you a team that wins, 16 games, 18 games, wherever they were at this year. Like, if you don't have the high-end star power, so it's like we need to slow our roll a little bit on the whole thing of, like, look at what Indiana did. And it's, well, Indiana's got, Halliburton, who's a top 10 player in the league, Siakam, who's, arguably top 30, top 40. So, Utah not having any of that in there. And again, not to pile on my good friend, FDH Lounge dignitary Bob Glassman, but no, Markkanen is not one of those guys. So that's where, again, this is what it ends up being when you don't have somebody that's in that point. And by the way, too, in glancing over at the TV, Clayton wearing a Washington Wizards hat, like again, what are we doing here? Like this whole stupid thing, if we can't acknowledge trades, we're going to live in pretend land as the draft is going along. Like I don't get it.
I mean, and again, Clayton showed during the NCAA tournament how important, he was to that forward team just in general.
Yeah.
And it strikes me as he'll be a guy that I think you're trying to build as like the second guy on a champion, like the premier guard on a champion. Not the premier, but
okay,
a top 2, like one of your best guards on a championship. I'm going to get there at some point. We're at hour 220, everyone. So
yeah. Well, and the one thing you can say about Clayton is that is from the looks of it here, from panning over to the green room, his baby mom has got a very aspirational ink game. She's very aggressive in that regard, for whatever that's worth. But it's very interesting. Yeah, that'll fit in well in Utah, by the way, where they're as straight-laced as it comes. But it's I don't get Clayton to Utah. I don't get a guy who can be a very good glue player for a team like that, unless they're keeping Bailey and unless they're trying to, unless they're saying the future starts now. It's making me believe they're going to hang on to Bailey and that maybe they may make a move. Maybe they may package some of their pieces and picks for somebody else to help them try and win some games this year. Although, again, that's daunting. If you're Utah, okay, and you're trying to plant your flag on doing something in 2025, 2026, that is going to be difficult in the landscape of the Western Conference. I'll say that much.
Yeah, and it's going to be it's tough for them because they're kind of in a, again, I hate to say sliding doors narrative, but it kind of is because they should have enough talent to at least compete for a play-in tournament spot, but I feel like in their best interest, they probably shouldn't.
They probably, yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Again, they could have the talent to make a run at the play-in tournament here, but we'll have to see how that goes. And as far as taking a look at winners and losers here, I think the first step towards that, and I will defer to you on this one here, Ben, as I need to step away for a moment here, but I will turn it over to you to just take a run through the picks, if you will, here, and
sure.
Just kind of get what we've done thus far, and then we can get to winners and you know what? Hang on, let me put a pin in that because we have a pick that is in, and the pick that is in for Brooklyn. There is Nolan Traore. So that's
there's Nolan Traore. So I can assist in this one, Rick. I feel like he was a guy who was a top 10 pick in most of the mocks, and then he just had a very disappointing season overseas.
Yeah.
And because of that, he kind of fell, but this was a guy that I had seen mocked to Brooklyn in multiple mock drafts. The one thing that I always thought was very impressive just in terms of watching is that he has that ability to create that burst to go to the rim and then make incredible passes at the same point.
And that's where it is interesting as you look at the way that the Nets are building the next incarnation of themselves. Traore, Demeen, it's a very European flavor to what they're building here, and that again, both of these guys being very crafty playmakers. It's interesting. You can see the direction that they're taking. 2 picks is a trend, as it were. Traore was getting mocked to them as high as 8 in a lot of the mock drafts here. He's a guy who slid. He's a guy that was getting mocked to them in some of the earlier ones here. But that's one where, like you said, the amount of development that he still needs to do to become a more consistent player, I guess shades of them in somewhat in that regard. That's one of those things where you can just see the front office guys going, yeah, let's see the coach win now with these guys. Yeah.
And again, like if we're talking early winners and losers, Rick, we got to include Brooklyn in there. Like,
yeah,
2 pretty solid picks for them.
They are, and most importantly for them, not going to help them win more than they want to win this year. So that's it.
Well, like I said, Rick, if you need to step away because we're on almost 2 hours and 30 minutes, let me go through some of the best available on the board.
Run through it, my man. I'll be right back.
Yeah. So obviously, the one guy that we've seen that has been dropping is obviously Kasparas Yakionis of Illinois. You know, he's been one of those guys that was mocked as high as in the 7 to 8 range. And again, he's a great pick and roll player, but there was some discussion that he kind of did struggle with turnovers on the next level. But he is probably the best pick and roll playmaker at this case. I would not be surprised to see Miami take him there. Obviously, Liam McNeely of UConn is another guard who was probably one of the top shooters in all of college basketball. And, you know, he has the ability to make plays from deep, but he did struggle with getting to the basket. At times, he wasn't as great as he was a three-point shooter. But he's a sort of a guy that I project as a great rotational role player in that NBA. So some other names that we kind of talked about, but I didn't really get to go deep in yet, but we'll probably have the opportunity to. Jace Richardson at Michigan State, obviously the son of former Golden State Warrior great Jason Richardson. He was mocked to a lot of teams, including Oklahoma City as high as 15. So another guy that I haven't really talked about, he's been a guy that I saw was essentially mocked at around this range right now. Nick Clifford is a really interesting player out of Colorado State. He's a shooting guard, made some great plays. He's an All-American down the stretch for that team. And he's, you know, he had a great year. He's one of the older players in this draft at 23, which is shocking to say that 23 years old is old for an NBA draft pick now. But he has definitely the opportunity as a high motor, great player. So it feels like he's one of those guys, especially I know we talked earlier, Rick, with the CBA. He's one of those guys that if you want to get now at a value, lock him into a rookie scale contract. Mm-hmm. He could be a guy in the rotation for a while.
He could, and this is one of those things where it's something where again, and I know that your specialization, I think, is primarily in basketball with the prospects and everything like this. As somebody who at least dabbles in baseball prospects. And I have, in so doing, I'm saying that I'm heading up our fantasydrafthelp.com long-term baseball prospecting there. It is a thing where, so I was being unduly modest when I said dabbled, but in looking at this, when you're in, say, AAA or AA at like age 24, 25, like that counts against you. That's a thing where it's like, what's the ceiling really? I personally don't think it really equates the same way in the NBA. Yeah. I don't really think it does, particularly, again, as teams are getting better at the trend that you and I have been talking about for a good 5 years now towards the more extreme commitment to player development in the league, that you can become a little bit more of a late bloomer. I think it's possible in the NBA because, again, you're not really sacrificing any athleticism for the most part until you get to your mid or in some cases even late 20s. And at some positions, that doesn't even matter as much. I mean, one of the reasons that Nikola Jokic is the most prized guy in the league long term, notwithstanding his age, is because he's going to be the same guy in 5 or 6 years, assuming he holds up, right? So it's like, you know, this whole thing about when you develop in basketball and when you come out of school, I don't think it counts as much as it does, say, in baseball, where it can be damaging because the projections they do hold up. that when you're at double A, if you're killing it at double A at age 24, you're not really going to translate to the bigs.
Right.
I don't think we've seen that as much in the NBA.
And one thing I would note too, Rick, is that we've seen over the last 4 to 5 years that teams are now going for younger players, whether they're freshmen or sophomores.
Yep.
And it feels like a lot of these guys who were essentially seniors or long-term players are now getting pushed down the draft, essentially. But that doesn't necessarily mean these are bad players. It's just the league has now moved to having if you want your lottery pick has to be young, it has to be a younger player, unless they are just an incredible talent just overall. But again, like I would not be surprised once we're currently I'm still looking at Miami is still on the clock at this current.
Miami is getting ready to make their pick here.
And very unsurprisingly, I was talking about the best available, they did finally get Yakionis from Illinois.
That's one that I could have seen, but I also thought, didn't Chase Richardson feel like a Miami pick? I could have seen them doing that too.
I feel like that too.
Yeah. And
my big thing overall too for them is that again, one thing that and we saw this in their sort of playoff series with the Cleveland Cavaliers is they did lack some secondary playmaking.
Yeah.
And essentially, like we saw a lot of Tyler Hero essentially getting isolated on an island, getting doubled, and not making a lot of plays. So he strikes me as a guy that can fit overall. And again, this is one of those scenarios too where we see like a team like San Antonio, a team like OKC, a team like Miami, just sitting back, like I mentioned in that draft lottery show, and just like our little NBA draft recap, sitting back, letting the draft come to them. And I feel like even if he doesn't pan out, because I during that discussion of the best available at this time, he does have his issues. He's a great pick and roll player, but is he as an explosive scorer as some of these other guys that we saw get drafted? Not really.
Right. But it's a thing where, and I know that for Tyler Hero, I know that the concerns are primarily on the defensive end, but it's something where in looking at this, with the ability of this kid to handle the ball, I wonder if the fact that Miami has the ability to run more sets now with Hero off the ball, that seems like it could be beneficial.
Right. And I do think one thing that we can definitely note with this Miami team is that they're still very young. I think we tend to forget that they made this huge run with Jimmy Butler over the last 4 to 5 years. But this is still a very young team. Bam's still young. Tyler Hero's still young. So getting a guy who is a good playmaker, and I feel like, if there was a Miami pick, it would be a guy like Yakionis at the end. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
He'll make winning plays. And I think the problem sometimes that we've seen in the NBA, and I think we've discussed this when we did the NFL draft mock too. Well, not the mock, but the live show for the NFL. There's this tendency late in the first round that if a guy drops, teams think there's something wrong with him. And at least from what I saw outside of some of the weaknesses that he showed during his time at Illinois, there wasn't any discussion that he was having bad workouts or anything along those lines. It's just, I feel like there are other guys that was just coveted more by other GMs at this time.
Yeah, I mean, I just think, you get into groupthink, you get into that type of stuff. I'm never a fan of groupthink for the sake of it, of like, oh, the guy's falling, that means he's tainted. There could be any number of different circumstances. And again, I didn't necessarily, it's hard to correctly pick the guys that are going to fall because of positional need or anything like that. I thought Asenge was a guy that was going to fall a bit. He ended up not being the case here. I thought that Clifford, frankly, could fall, and he's fallen further than I thought he would. I had Clifford going 20 to Miami, and so there's just guys who just for whatever. Rasheer Fleming is a guy that I picked to fall, and that looks pretty correct at this point. I got him going 27 to Brooklyn, and he could very well be there. And a lot of times, again, it's just because of positional need. Or there just happens to be maybe one guy left on the board the teams like a little bit more than they like you. Although in the case of Fleming, I had him going behind Newell, who I had going 18 to Washington, and he's still there. So you get guys that are falling, and it's not necessarily a reflection on them. And that's where, again, I'm never a big fan of judging anybody on that basis, because sometimes, and again, we go back to Shedeur Sanders in the NFL. That was a thing where the entire fiasco of the pre-draft process that his camp had that was responsible for that. And where teams are like, yeah, we don't want to deal with the whole 3-ring circus. So sometimes you bring it on yourself, but sometimes you don't. And Yeko Sionis, I don't think, he clearly didn't bring it on himself. But when you're looking at teams that, again, to put my own 2 cents in, some of the winners thus far, I think Knupel going to Charlotte, leaving aside the easy ones, Flagg and Harper, those are easy ones there. Edgecombe on talent to Philadelphia, I can't argue with that, but the fit is not good. But Knupel to Charlotte, he works on the fit level as well as the upside. Bailey to Utah, that's a home run if they keep him. Some of the other picks here, I don't know if there's too many of them that I really love, past that point. Carter Bryant to San Antonio, I have a feeling that that's going to work out. I really, really do.
I'm going to be pretty shocked if it doesn't.
Yeah, and it's part of it is too. San Antonio just deserves the benefit of the doubt for a lot of what they've done. For the better part of the 21st century, they were the team that was the most successful at this as far back as when they were winning the titles. Because again, just ask yourself, okay, who else in the NBA was really high on Parker and Ginobili when San Antonio took them? So that's a thing where again their ability to spot talent. Particularly historically on the international level, but also on the collegiate level, and make it work there. But some of the ones that I'm not kind of getting as much, Murray Boyles to Toronto, just on a high floor pick at 9. I'm just not a fan of that. I'm sorry, I'm not a fan of that.
Yeah. And I feel like you're going to say, I feel like it's the same thing with Portland too. It's like these are good, young, talented players, but they feel like they were overdrafted from where. Yeah. They could have both. Again, I know that's more for Portland than it is for Murray Boyles, but I do feel like Toronto could have traded back a couple of picks and could have gotten him at 10 or 11.
Well, and talking about trading back, Portland could have traded a lot further back in 16 to get Yang Hansen. So I've got
the thing that's more surprising to me is that not that they took him, but it's more that there was another trade.
Yeah.
Made by another team that they probably could have done themselves.
Yeah. Know the market value of a player. They could have gone a lot further back than 16. They're one of my big losers thus far. I got to say, Memphis is a winner trading up to get Coward because, again, like I said, I'm sort of agnostic on because he's such an unconventional prospect in terms of, like you said, barely any tape from his most recent season. We saw what he had done prior to that in college. So much of this coming out of what he's done in the combine and subsequent workouts. But it's like, if this guy develops, then they got their Desmond Bane replacement and a whole crap load of draft picks to replace Desmond Bane. So, that's the best of both worlds. If you got Desmond Bane on a rookie contract plus the 4 ones for Desmond Bane, like if this guy can develop into the same guy, and it's hard to say right now that he can't, it's hard to say that. So, they're a big winner to me at this point. And just there's a lot of these picks right here where I'm doing the old, thumbs in the middle here. If I was to be a film critic, I'm lukewarm on a lot of these ones here. Brooklyn, if they can develop these international players and really kind of get, the most out of them. There were, again, questions about both Demine and Traore, but they could be foundational pieces for Brooklyn if it all works out. And seeing now that the pick is in for Utah, and I'm going to hit refresh on Wikipedia. We could put Utah down as another winner if this is the case. Will Riley is what Wikipedia is saying.
Yeah, and that's what that appears to be the selection. Illinois too, Rick.
Upside.
He was probably a guy along with Yakunis who is a very interesting guy. Tall, fluid, can play, has a lot of upside, but again, very similar to a lot of these guys we've already mentioned during this draft.
Yeah.
Not a great three-point shooter, only shot 33%, and then he does lack some of that explosive burst. And I guess one of the questions I have for scouts, too, is what do we define as explosive burst now in the NBA? Like, it just feels like it's such a term that we just use, and there's no way we can really quantify that anymore.
It's a good question, yeah. That as far as why scouts would kind of put that designation on somebody, I'm looking to see here because I've seen him being projected to be a better and more consistent shooter than he was at Illinois, but the free throw percentage 724, that doesn't really back it up. I mean, okay. So I mean, he's a guy where, again, I keep seeing that a lot of folks believe that he has a lot of potential. So to be more than what he's shown thus far. So that's another puzzle piece to where, is Utah staying with Bailey? Are they now trying to build with what they have and forsaking the whole tanking route? Like, I feel like the Riley pick, much like the Walter Clayton pick, points the arrow somewhat in that direction, but it's hard to say. But again, he's a guy who's perceived by a lot of scouts to have a pretty decent ceiling. He's got a decent floor. I mean, the worst case scenario is that this guy's probably a long-term rotation player in the league, right? I mean, he does enough things right to where that would be the case, it would seem like. And that's where, as I'm looking at this here, back-to-back Fighting Illini, they didn't happen to have a third serious prospect in the draft, did they? They could be going to Atlanta. I don't think they do.
I don't think they do either.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's interesting.
Run on Illini. Yeah.
Like we discussed, Rick, there's still a lot of guys who are still available at this time. And,
yeah.
We're 8 picks left in this draft. And there's still a handful of guys that, again, you do the math, there's only X amount of guys who are going to make it in the league and be rotational players. But again, as we see now too, with the way of the world of depth and all these other things, the one thing I have to note too is like these later first round picks on rookie scale contracts, just because of the collective bargaining agreement, are going to be hugely important for teams.
Yes,
trying to stay
very
under
much
the
so.
first and second apron of the CBA. So.
Very much so, yeah. And so Will Riley is interesting. On a night where, again, Utah is one of the question marks in this draft as far as does it spell a turning point for them directionally in terms of the end of their tanking and whatever, which again, the chance to get Depancia, the guy who's the in-state guy who's going to be playing at BYU this coming year here, and presumably the fans in Salt Lake would like to see him end up with the hometown team here, as it were, at least as regards to his college ball, the hometown team. Very interesting as to the direction that Utah is taking, and the fact that at Bailey at number 5 being a higher upside guy than they potentially thought they were going to get at 5. So yeah, it's now the whole thing here on this entire scenario of which I said to you when we were talking about this off here, I was very dubious that anybody would be, in my estimation, dumb enough to let me go to a crap team so I can be the alpha guy on the team. I still think that's a dumb strategy because a lot of guys go to places like Washington and Charlotte and they're never heard from ever again. But I mean, if indeed that was what Ace Bailey was looking at, I mean, I can see where, as is the case with a lot of players, they're looking at it like playing in Salt Lake, blah. So there's probably that part of it. But on the other hand, you want to go to a place where nobody's going to outshine you. It's hard to do better than Utah, who, like we said, is brimming with good players. But if they had anybody that was even very good at this point, they wouldn't be the garbage team that they were last year.
And I think the real question, too, and I think regarding Bailey's camp at this point, there's 2 ways you go with this. Either you report to camp and you just say all the right things, say, look, I'm excited to join this team. Or you do the secondary thing, is just hold out.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'd use the rule, too, it's like, if remember, Bailey's still young. He's 18, 19 years old. If he really wanted to not sign with Utah, he could go back into the draft. They would just have his rights in the interim. So So, again, this is, I'm not surprised it's an Ainge family decision in Utah. But this is more like you are, for a team that's kind of been straddling the tank for the last 2 to 3 seasons, you're really pushing your luck if this doesn't work out.
Definitely, and it is worth noting that Will Riley being Canadian, according to Prisoner of the Moment Goobers on Twitter this week, it's now SGA and not Steve Nash that he'll be making a run at for greatest Canadian player of all time.
As we all know.
That's right.
As we all know.
Yes, and I highly recommend everyone checking out the great appearance on the Tony Mazer podcast this week. But as I was checking that out, it was funny that Tony brought that up to you as well. Your interaction on that basis there.
I love the fact people in the mentions, man. That's what you got to do.
That's right.
And I still love y'all.
Yeah.
I still support y'all Canadians. I still love you.
Yeah.
Nothing ever changed. I think a lot of y'all sometimes just jump to conclusions. Not just people. Like people jump to conclusions online real quick, y'all.
Yes, they do. They absolutely do.
But and still love y'all. Still support y'all. Hopefully Murray Boyles works out for Toronto. But
yeah, absolutely. And as far as Atlanta having the next pick, now it is interesting that coming into the draft, and this is before, again, the last 24 hours or so, that deal to get Porzingis to where I would have said, well, the thing for Atlanta would be to, potentially try and beef up the pivot a little bit more. So you've already seen, the Derek Queen pick from earlier on, and, wherever that ends up, as far as whether that ends up being a pick that sticks with Atlanta or not, that was a little bit speculative early on. But I don't think in either instance it precludes going back in that direction at this point here, too. The number of players that could be available in that spot might be a little bit more limited at this point. Rasheer Fleming, the power forward / center combo from St. Joe's, would be a possibility here. Maxime Renaud, the center from Stanford, could be a possibility as well. And as I'm speculating, we are about to find out in real time here. I'm going to hit refresh on Wikipedia and see if I can scoop the commissioner. Drake Powell, shooting guard from North Carolina. Although I said that at the same time it showed up on my TV, so I guess I didn't scoop anything. Yeah.
Well, again,
my reaction time on Wiki.
Well, I mean, again, to go to Powell, like again, he's very sort of the archetype that every NBA team's looking for. 3-and-D guy, shot 38% from three. Kind of had an interesting year. I feel like that's the words I use now for most of these guys in college. But, I mean, again, he's going to be, he has a good wingspan, can make big plays. But the real question is that it was going to be consistency. And, again, at North Carolina, he wasn't a main guy. He was kind of just a guy that was part of that rotation. And, again, and we've seen this now more than ever, Rick, in the last couple of NBA drafts, is you're seeing NBA teams project out guys who are on loaded college teams.
Okay.
Trying to determine, is their ceiling higher, or is it more just like they were playing on a great college team, essentially?
Well, you may have answered the question I was going to ask you before I asked it, which was riddle me this. Why is he not going in the first round in many of the mocks that are out there? So is that why, the fact that it's perceived that like he was just it's sort of like, remember like when, I wish I could forget this, when Dion Waiters went with the 4th pick in the draft, what was it, 2013 or whatever, to the Cavs with the 4th pick overall when he was like the 6th man at Syracuse. Is that why? Is it the notion of not standing out enough at North Carolina?
I mean, it's a definite thing. And again, we saw North Carolina, again, essentially barely make the NCAA tournament and then have a nice little mini run in that period of time.
Yeah.
So, again, and I feel like, too, especially when you're this late in the draft, there's a lot of guys who are just, it was like same story, different name almost.
Sure.
Like, it's a lot of guys who were successful in college or who were projected by NBA scouts to be guys who could exist on an NBA roster. So
yeah.
And again, too, it's like teams are right now looking for the archetype, and we're in a pace and space era. Like, people want 3-and-D guys at this point.
It was I was saying on the TV proposed trade to Brooklyn. So I guess it's now Brooklyn where we would be looking at seeing him fit in. And that's a thing where it's very interesting because, again, you talk about a North Carolina team that's very talented versus a Brooklyn team at this point that's not. But that's an interesting, him going to Brooklyn makes me look at this a little bit more approvingly, even if it's still a little bit of a reach at this point. I don't know that it's as much of a reach with the 22nd pick. I think it's still a reach. But the whole thing of like apples to apples, that like if you're drafting him at this point to be a supporting guy on your team, even though your team's not really that good yet, by the time you get to where you want to go, you hope he can be the kind of supporting player for you that he was for North Carolina. I mean, there's a certain logic to that, I guess, rather than just swinging on upside right now. You take a guy who, at this point, I don't know that they would admit to you that they're taking a floor guy, but, they're going to need floor guys when they get where they're going. And I think we agree they're probably going to at some point, unless they do a horrible job of player acquisition. Jordi Fernandez is the coach they need to take, to get themselves to where they want to get to. And you're going to need floor guys at that point. So mixing up the whole draft strategy for Brooklyn, that does kind of make sense with all the picks they have and knowing that that's what they're going to need at a certain point.
Right. And again, based on, let me see, I'm also trying to just get the heads up on what exactly. So this was, okay, I did want to double check. So this was this was a pick that was acquired in the Porzingis trade.
Okay.
So it's going to be, overall, what I would say is that you might want to take high floor guys in certain situations, especially like we see how roster construction is different in the NBA, Rick.
Right.
Everyone's playing similar styles. The roster construction is vastly different.
Right.
And one thing that I noticed, and I think you would probably agree with me on this trade at least, that the NBA, you need as many 3 and D wing guys as humanly possible right now.
Yes.
And it's not the worst case scenario to make those decisions.
Yeah. I mean, if he can become a 3 and D guy, that's perfectly cromulent for what their needs are going to be going forward. And then you have New Orleans on the pick, the clock with the pick at 23. And that's the thing where, again, for as much as I am not a proponent of best player available, it is one of these things where, like, you look at the New Orleans roster and it's like there's an exception to every rule. And I'm like, well, this might be the exception to the rule, because it's like, if you're looking at the New Orleans roster, I mean, outside of potentially point guard, I mean, in particular, if you're figuring Murray to be in that spot, then there isn't really anything where it's like you don't want to draft somebody because they got this guy in that position. Like New Orleans kind of has the freedom to just kind of whatever. And again, they sort of like Utah, they have many, many, many serviceable players on their team. It's just, it doesn't add up to anything. It's much like Utah. It just doesn't, right. The whole is significantly less than the sum of the parts in New Orleans, much like Utah.
Right. And it looks like, unless this is a decision, I think they're going with Asa Newell from Georgia, who was a guy that I really liked early on in the draft combine timeline.
Yeah.
But he kind of has fallen just because a little bit he's undersized. But the one thing I do think what Newell is really good at is that he was very efficient during his time at getting Georgia into the NCAA tournament. Again, the issue with him, it's the weakness is that I feel like we talk to his scouts and we see these things. It's just inconsistency. Yeah.
And that's where, and again, you look at New Orleans the last couple of years, and it's like, are they the organization that is going to cure a player of inconsistency? I mean, that hasn't really been the track record of the last couple of years. We're, of course, saying all of this because we get this from Wikipedia, which again appears to have scooped the TV coverage here, which we'll see if the commissioner ratifies this here in real time that Newell is the pick. And that is...
and also, too, it's like, in terms of overall raw talent, he might be one of the most raw talented players in this draft.
Okay.
And if your biggest knock is consistency, college is college, Rick. Let's just be honest.
Yeah.
Like, he only played 1 year there. So,
yeah.
I don't know if consistency is really the thing. But again, too, it's like, the question, too, is what is his role on an NBA team? And it feels like, especially with New Orleans, there's just a lot of guys, essentially.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's a roster of just a lot of guys, and again,
it was, excuse me, Rick, just confirmed.
Yes, and that's one of those things where, again, you get past a certain point in the draft, and inconsistency being the biggest knock on somebody. That's where I'm just dying to take the guy, because that shows you the upside, what they're capable of. And I freely admit to being somebody that could be an upside whore, but it's one of those things where, whether it be, again, I was a huge proponent of the Browns taking Jared Goff in 2016. I tried to popularize the phrase "turn your head and cough for Goff," because again, just seeing him throw that deep pass and seeing what he was capable of, and I'm going to say something here that's going to open me up to ridicule. But it's by the way, in terms of the profile, never lies. Something that you have found fault with in my profile, and I'll admit to this, is how much I fall in love with highlight reels, but much to my own detriment. Where I was a guy that really. A player fell so short of what I was hoping for when I saw his highlight reel was Dennis Smith Jr. I mean, when you saw the best of what he could do, it's like, this guy's going to be such a star. So there's a certain fraught danger to that. I get that with being like how I am and falling in love with the highlight reel. But it's one of those things where it's like, I'm one of these guys where it's like, if you show that you can do it, then it can be unlocked in you. It's there. There's not something to be unlocked in everybody, Ben. It doesn't exist in everybody. What Newell is capable of doing is, you've got, out of the guys that have been drafted thus far, you can count on less than two hands probably the guys that have the potential of doing what he can do. And I'm not sure you need all the fingers on the second hand to count all the guys. So in this spot here, take them. You're New Orleans. What have you got to lose? I'm gonna paraphrase the orange guy who said this in a different context one time. But what have you got to lose?
Again, too, it's like, obviously one of the big things that he's going to have to work on, at least on the pro level, unless they see him very similar to Zion's, like his 3-point shooting. He struggled shooting the three.
Yeah,
but again, I don't think that's what he has to do at Georgia, to be totally honest, Rick. So
right. Yeah, I mean, it's a good pick for New Orleans in this spot. I had him dropping to 18, and that was, frankly, that was a little lower than I saw him going on a lot of mocks. So there were some guys, because again, there's always guys that are going to, particularly when they're kind of packed in tight, here, as a lot of these guys are, and I'd said before, maybe about 15 to 28. I guess, basically, more or less, roughly speaking. There's always going to be guys that fall a little bit further, and guys where you may be outside of the consensus a bit, making your mock draft when you look at some of the other ones. So I had Newell going 18, which was lower than he was generally going. I would have to say the average for him, if I remember off the top of my head, was probably closer to like 15, maybe even 14, probably back end of the lottery. So to get him here, if you're New Orleans, he fell even further than I thought he was going to fall. Again, you got to be happy with that. I mean, I'll say, again, you're still New Orleans. You still have the burden of proof that you can actually develop this guy. And, if this is actually one of the rare seasons where Zion Williamson is available for a good chunk of games, that's going to cut into his playing time. But still, yeah, I mean, roll the dice on this guy. You're New Orleans. What have you got to lose?
Yeah. And at this point, I'd make the analogy, just at this point, take the risk. And if it works out, fantastic. If not, it's just a late round pick. You can always survive.
I would say that, yeah.
So I do want to know too, Rick, as we're 6 picks away from the end of the first round. So
yep.
Teams still on the clock: Oklahoma City, Orlando, 2 Brooklyn picks back to back, Boston, Phoenix, and the Clippers will be the final pick of the night.
Yep.
So
still
a lot of guys on the board too. And we'll, after we get an update on Oklahoma City's pick.
Wouldn't that be something if my pick from before ended up being the one? If they doubled up at center and went Danny Wolf, we'll see. That is, Wikipedia doesn't have the pick ahead of the commissioner this time, so we bated breath for Adam Silver to tell us who it is. Yeah. I'm hoping it's not Danny Wolf, because I don't.
I would not be surprised to see Ben Soroff go here too.
I've seen him mocked to them.
That looks like it's going to be Neat Clifford.
Ooh, that's. You know what? If they weren't going to go center, again, as a fan of a rival championship contender, I'm not loving this. Oh, I didn't see who it was that was in the green room there. That a very interesting suit, a very you don't often see a 2 or 3 toned suit here. It's. And I've said before on the show that I am, when it comes to subtle grades between colors, I am slightly colorblind. So I can't quite, I don't know if I would say navy blue at the top of the suit there, but
okay. Also, I'm getting a report coming out. I believe this pick is now going to go to Sacramento.
Oh, okay.
So Nick Clifford goes to Sacramento.
Okay.
Still don't know the exact terms of this deal. Orlando's now on the clock, but yeah, I mean, for if this pick does actually go to Sacramento, we still don't know the terms of the deal yet. But this does actually make sense for Sacramento. They needed another guy who could be a perimeter scorer for them as they try to figure out what to do with DeMar DeRozan and LaVine and the rest of that crew right now. But there was rumors, I had seen some Kings fans discussing that there was potential that they were going to try to trade into the first round to pick a guard. And a guy like Nick Clifford, I feel like he was solid at Colorado State, does a lot of things well. I'm not sure why he wouldn't be a rotational player in today's NBA.
He clearly will be, absolutely. That's a good.
I don't know if Sacramento's his best fit, but
I don't know either.
And I also have a sinking suspicion too. Once we get the full news of what Oklahoma's, I'm trying to get the news now, Rick, in terms of the what exactly Sacramento gave up.
While you're finding that, I'll go a little bit more deep digging here on the sartorial thing here. Segueing down to like purple on the arms. It's like a deeper blue at the top of the suit, sort of like, a little bit more purplish and then almost whitish at the bottom of the suit. It's as though he took a piece of clothing and threw it in the washer, and the colors kind of ran, except they ran in an organized fashion. So you know that that's not what it was. The colors all kind of ran in one direction here. It's a little bit of one would say almost a little bit sort of tie-dye inspired. So there's your red carpet deep dive on him. Back to the on-court stuff. But he is a guy who he's a good fit. He's a guy who I think he's got some decent upside too. I mean, I'm not sure that he's necessarily relegated to being a rotational guy for a team here. I think with his offensive capabilities.
And again, so like as we saw, Sacramento now is going through a whole new rebuild again, and they're going to need some players. And there was times like we saw in the playing game against Dallas that they just got whooped on in the second half.
Right.
They really struggled shooting from the outside.
They did.
Getting another perimeter scorer who, I mean, I would say out of all the guys outside, like the top guys, like in my personal opinion, I personally thought that Nick Clifford was the most pro-ready player in this draft outside like the top two. So he feels like a guy that will be a good part of Sacramento's rotation. Once we know, like there's still no official report yet on what the Kings gave up to pick him.
Right.
But as I'm going to assume, Rick, that it was most likely, if I had to guess, they probably traded a future first rounder or a couple future second rounders. Because again, at this point too, OKC has to kind of also worry about contracts too at this point. Yeah,
because Hinkie the Hoarder doesn't have enough firsts in the years to come here. Might as well get a few more.
You might as well just keep on going.
It is, and again, there is the, strategic vanity of pimping my own strategy here. But I will say, I think I'm right about this. There's a bit of an opportunity cost for Oklahoma City here in that, you had the chance, to add Danny Wolf to that front court here too, that, you have from the pick that was made previously, you have Sorber in that spot there. Him and Wolf would be really interesting. And again, maybe there's not room for both of them on the roster at the same time. Maybe one of them becomes a two-way or starts the year out of the rotation. I get that. There's not a lot of rotation spots to go around in Oklahoma City. But, if it is going to be the thing of trying to accrue different possibilities here, although, again, maybe they believe in Sorber even more than we're thinking that they do. Maybe they're thinking that he may be the answer for when they do have to cut bait financially with Hartenstein. It would behoove any team, I think, to kind of spread the possibilities around here just in case.
Right. And I have a feeling unless there's a player involved, this purely seems like a trade for a future pick. I'm assuming OKC, that's what they're getting out of this deal.
Sure. Yeah. And so you got Orlando coming up now. Oh, Jace Richardson, according to Wikipedia, just mere seconds ahead of the TV here in my case. So he he fits in well. Okay, so to everything that I've been saying, because again, I'm seeing in some quarters where he's being listed primarily as a shooting guard. So to my whole thing of like, Suggs is not a true point guard. That where I thought for Orlando coming out of this, if I had one more nit to pick on them being a super legitimate contender in the Eastern Conference, albeit the way it is right now, I think they can make it as far as the East Finals. But how much does he help in that way? How much does he help with a little bit of true distribution, even if maybe shooting guard might be his slightly more natural position?
I mean, I feel like, too, one of the knocks on him was just he played a lot off the ball at Michigan State. But you saw in the NCAA tournament that he was a guy who could turn the tide on offense, was very efficient, played very well at periods of time during the tournament, too, where he looked like the best player on the floor, clearly, at periods of time. And for a team like Orlando to get him late, like, again, he was a guy who was projected in the middle of this draft, 10 to 15. And now the 10 to 16 and fall all the way down to Orlando. This is, for them, a very good backup guard that they can add to this roster. And the one thing that I will say is that I really like Orlando, Rick. The one thing I think about them as this pick came in, one thing they were truly lacking was an explosive guard.
Yeah.
And this is the one guy that in this draft, outside of like a couple of the other higher level guards like Edgecombe and Johnson, he's that guy that can sort of turn the table, because they tried to make Cole Anthony, that didn't really work. Jury is still out on Anthony Black at the moment, so it's going to be very interesting. He seems like one of the if I look at him, if based off his efficiency and all these positive things we saw with him during the NCAA tournament, to me it feels like he's the perfect six-man candidate right now.
Yeah, like as a Cavs fan, I don't love this because I think this is going to help Orlando in one of the areas that they needed help in here. And what's funny is, in looking at this, there were initially, I was seeing a number of mocks where he was going to Miami at 20. I remember when Miami was on the clock, I even said this, he feels like he would be a real Miami pick, a classic kind of Heat pick. In my mock draft, I didn't have him going there because I had him going 17 to Minnesota. I didn't think he would last to Miami because I kept seeing all these other mocks where he was going earlier and earlier. And that's the whole thing. Sometimes you put the okey doke on yourself to where you're thinking, Miami makes a lot of sense, but I'm not sure he's still going to be there. Didn't see the scenario where he's still there and Miami lets him go, albeit that was a scenario where I think even that was potentially a thing where, like, Jaco Sionis, I don't think they saw him being there. We said that he was
firmly entrenched in most mocks from 10-18.
In the top 7 in some mocks on CBS, which is ridiculous. But like, even when he was going 8, 9, 10, I mean, where did I have him going? I think I had him going 8 to Brooklyn. So I got sucked into that as well. So he drops to Miami, and Miami takes him instead of Richardson, who dropped. That's where this gets to be very interesting, is who's there scooping up value. In the end, I'm partially right that Richardson will be playing in the state of Florida, just not with the team that I picked.
Yeah. And again, too, like, it's a very noted thing that I brought up in hour 2 of this, is that sometimes in the NBA, when you're a general manager, you just need to let the draft come to you.
Yep.
And talented guys fall all the time, and this is the opportunity that both Miami and Orlando got. 2 really good young guard prospects that I think both of us thought were going to go much sooner. And they're still, like, at this point, too, like, obviously Liam McNeely, who I honestly think is probably going to go with one of these Brooklyn picks right here, is going to be up there, too. I also got the deep sleepers, Rick, but I figured we'd wait on the deep sleepers until we get to the 29th to 30th picks. So.
Okay. Let me ask you this. I'm still on Orlando for a second here. Because I'd had in my mock, I had Walter Clayton going with this pick here. And that's one where that would have made me truly homicidal, because I really think he would have been exactly what Orlando needed, even though I think Richardson helps them a lot too. Knowing that Clayton was moving up the draft boards here, is that a situation maybe where Orlando, and again, I'm saying that as I'm forgetting here for, I guess, momentarily, that they used up a lot of their draft capital in the Memphis deal, which, as I said, when we were recording our NBA Finals review / look ahead to next year, I think Orlando simultaneously gave up too much for what Bane is worth, and yet they got the perfect player for what they needed. I think that's actually, both things are true there. But it's like, should they have been a little bit aggressive with what they could have done, maybe to try and move up and get Clayton? That's an interesting thought.
I mean, it's an interesting thought. And ultimately, for both these teams, it really did work out for them. They both got two high-quality guys. It's just
right.
You have to ask the question, and we bring this up.
That
some of these, you want to use your draft capital wisely. But if you feel like, and again, I think sometimes we also underestimate these scouting departments and general managers for these professional teams, that they have a lot of people working on the draft, Rick. I think this isn't the old days of, the 1980s and 90s where you had maybe 6 dudes total. These are expansive scouting staffs. Watching a lot of basketball. So it feels like to me in most cases there will be opportunities where they will find the right player for their team. And again, too, one thing that we discussed too, and I know we'll discuss in maybe a recap of the draft or something else during Summer League, is how a lot of these teams are going to start valuing these later selections. And maybe going for more, the beginning of the lottery is for the pie in the sky player in most cases.
Right.
But the later half of the first round is we're much more focused on trying to get guys we know are going to project out in our rotation, or at least within our G League teams, essentially.
Right. Yeah, and that is sort of the traditional flow chart of the draft, if you will, as far as, again, you got to be swinging from the heels towards the top of the draft here. And then I think situationally as you go along later in the draft. And famously a couple of years ago, a pick that I was very, very hyped about that the Cleveland Cavaliers made was, I think it was with the 30th pick in the first round, Kevin Porter Jr., because that was a guy with exceedingly high upside who fell because of, let's face it, character issues. And that's what ended up getting him bounced out of Cleveland, and then subsequently for a certain time bounced out of the league altogether. So you have that be the case, and sometimes you have to overlook these things. I segue to I in order to keep from getting sued, I'll say a guy who, to my knowledge, has no such character questions about him, Ben Suraf, the guard from Israel.
We'll go for. I know it's a tougher scenario right now in life, so we can't. This is an NBA draft podcast. We gotta, stay the course. So, but again, another guy that I had mentioned earlier after Noah Senge was drafted, another part of that Radifasio team that played really well. And I believe that they are, unless I am mistaken, and maybe it already happened. But no, tomorrow they're facing Bayern Munich in the Bundesliga championship game.
That's right. He's still going.
Team, and he is arguably, there are timelines where some would say he was the more pro-ready prospect.
Right.
And he's aggressive, makes great decisions out of the pick and roll. Again, like we have all said, he was a breakout star of the U18 European Champions. That's how a lot of guys got on the radar, essentially, in more recent years. But the one thing, and again, this is another common occurrence, and I really wish we stop using this scenario too, is just doesn't shoot well from three yet.
Yeah, I mean, that's something he's got to develop as well. And, I'll go with a little bit of topical humor here, Ben. He's likely to be the first NBA draft pick ever to get picketed by his mayor. But that's another story for another time.
That's a whole other story for another
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. But he does need to. Yes, he's got to expand his shooting radius a little bit here. But again, a steady guy. I don't know necessarily. I don't think he's got the highest ceiling at this point here. But again, it's really interesting. You see what the Nets are doing because they're not
third European player selected in this draft.
Yeah, and it's
the men essentially played in.
Yeah, and it's
third European or the third international player taken by this team.
And as much as I'm a proponent of trying to go for upside as much as you can with as many picks as you can, again, I like picks like this because to build out the roster, again, to get to where they're looking to go aspirationally and where I think they are capable of going, this is the kind of guy you need to kind of fill out your rotation. So, I mean, I like that they're not afraid to take guys who are primarily defined by their floor at this stage of the draft. Because you can't have an entire, when you have as many picks as this, you can't swing from the heels on every pick. You need a number of safe picks in here. And I feel like he's a pretty safe pick and, you know, unsensational. I'd use that word at this point in time. I mean, maybe he can develop into more, but I like the notion of this. I like the notion of getting a guy where it's kind of like he is what he is, because you need to, you know, in this league, what do we keep saying? You need to go 10 deep the way that the league is going. It is going towards being a depth league, and there's not a lot of star power out there. It's on the second units. It's functional guys that are out there that can eat up minutes and everything like that. This guy, I think, fits perfectly for where they're looking to go. I applaud this. You can't be super aggressive on every pick that you make. You have to, you know, envision how the roster pieces fit together. And it's easy to see where this guy can fit into the roster for the team they're looking to build.
We've noted too, Rick, that sometimes judging European basketball can be hard for draft picks.
Yes.
It's hard sometimes because, again, the style is different than in the NBA. And because of that, you also have to take a look at why, you know, there are some picks that are great, and then there are going to be some picks that are no, because Saraf, I would think, was the higher touted prospect last year going into this 2025 NBA draft. But he kind of had Senge had a couple of better games this year, and then he's kind of, you know, he's had times being up and down. But it's going to be very interesting to see. Brooklyn is now majorly focused right now on trying to build up this young core. They have a really good young core at this period of timeline.
They do.
It's really not surprising to me that, you know, this is the decision making, because you really want to. It feels more like we've discussed this too in terms of like in the NFL draft as well. Like, I feel like there are certain teams in this draft, like, we still don't know what their identity is.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like Brooklyn's done a very good job of using these first-round picks to establish an identity. Like, we're going to play a little bit differently, maybe play a little bit faster than a lot of these other teams in the NBA, especially in the Eastern Conference.
Maybe so. And interestingly here, with this pick, this next pick that they had back-to-back, power forward / center Danny Wolf from Michigan. There's the Danny Wolf pick that I've been waiting for. And it's an interesting contrast to Saraf, is it not? Because the Saraf pick, again, I don't mean to do, you know, damning by faint praise. I don't mean to bury the kid. But I mean, for right now, he is what he is. Perhaps he can grow into more depending on what his development is. But Danny Wolf is not a guy that you have to squint at very hard to see the upside here. Because, man, like, if that guy expands his shooting radius even a little bit, boy, oh boy, oh boy, you look at what he did at Michigan and you kind of extrapolate that.
Yeah, I mean, he was one of the more polarizing figures in all of basketball, just in terms of his ability. And another great foundational piece for the Brooklyn Nets. I mean, he makes a lot of great plays, but again, let's just be honest, scoring is his issue right now. He didn't shoot well from free throw line, not a high-profile shooter at this period of time. But he seems like I like to use it. We use this more in the NFL than in the NBA, but he's a hub guy to me. He strikes me as a guy that can go out on the floor, make great decisions in terms of running the offense and helping his team try to get there. So it feels like, at least, Rick, of all these Brooklyn Net picks, a lot of them are very sort of playmaker-esque type picks.
Right.
So, and one thing that you could make the argument with Brooklyn last year is, like, there wasn't a lot of playmaking on that roster.
That is true. And again, and it's going towards this whole trend of the league that really was sort of, I mean, I would say pioneered by, you know, Jokic, but that would be an ahistorical kind of comment here, because I think any of the relatives of Wilt Chamberlain would be like, yo, what about Wilt? He did a lot of assists too, and indeed he did. But in the modern game, Jokic, and then, you know, subsequently we've seen in Sacramento where they've kind of opened things up for Sabonis to kind of play more of that role, Bam Adebayo. This is one of these things where, again, in the modern game, the ability to have that kind of secondary playmaking from the pivot is very important. And as I'm looking at this here, again, his college numbers on three-point shooting, 345 at Yale the year before, 336 this past year. So, okay. Now, again, better than the 304 his first year at Yale. So, I mean, it's going in the right direction, but it needs to move in the right direction further. Free throw percentage from 625 to 717 back to 594. So, interestingly, this year was kind of a step back in progress at both the three-point line and the free throw line. So, if he can recapture the sort of, momentum that he had going, ironically, before he got to Michigan, which is where he really took off as a prospect. Yeah, I mean, I think that this guy may have a little bit upside beyond what he is at this point in time. But again, that's the interesting thing. I think he's got a decent ceiling, but, again, he's got a pretty good floor as it is. I mean, even if he never becomes a floor spacer, just the things that he brings, that's another guy that fits into the rotation. I mean, the rotation of the future is shaping up in Brooklyn. They don't have anybody high end yet. That will come in time. But again, if you have the pieces put together, in the rotation, things will follow. So an interesting move there that they made. You knew somebody in the first round was going to take a swing on Danny Wolf. There's no way he was going to drop out of it.
No, I think that was just a general, just because of his ability to be an offensive hub.
Yep.
At periods of time at Michigan and then also his time at Yale. So it's going to be, I'd say, an interesting scenario. Now, I got to say, the pick is in for Boston right now.
Yep.
And the one guy who is still the best available on the board is a guy that they probably need, in Liam McNeely. So, actually, no, pick is in.
Pick is in. It's not him.
About very briefly, Rick, earlier when I was surmising about the European players.
Yeah.
Hugo Gonzalez of Spain. So
now,
he's one of these guys who kind of popped off a little bit earlier on a different timeline. Didn't really play a lot of minutes at Real Madrid at this, but he showed a lot of, great play as a swingman. He was very aggressive, but again, the problem too is he's a shooter. It's going to take a little bit more time he still is not polished yet. So this kind of if I'm Boston, this seems like a stash pick.
I was going to ask, draft and stash, you think?
It feels like a drafted stash pick for Boston, which makes a lot of sense.
Now, on the other hand, I mean, somebody's got to eat up some of the Jason Tatum minutes next year. So, I mean, you could see it going the other way.
Yeah.
So that's going to be very interesting. And whatever they say in the immediate aftermath of the draft here, I mean, one would think if he's a draft and stash, it will become apparent pretty quickly. They'll probably close the door on that rather than give any false hope that he'll be part of it next year. But yeah, I mean, given where they're at, I could see this one going either way.
Yeah.
And so you got at the end of the first round here, picks 29 and 30. Again, so many of these picks that were previously traded. Pick 29 is Phoenix's pick from Cleveland via Utah. This is part of the Donovan Mitchell trade. And pick 30, the LA Clippers from Oklahoma City. Is this still part of the Paul George deal from years back?
I believe, if I'm correct, I think that was part of it. I think it was a rerouted pick because of that deal.
That's crazy. Wow. Yeah, for how many years?
So. I'm not 100%, but it's up there. But again, I will be personally very surprised if McNeely doesn't go in the next two picks here. He strikes me as a guy that would fit in either of these situations.
Well, and that's the thing here too, that for as much as I laughed at Phoenix for what they did previously, I will in equal time I will give them a lot of credit, because Liam McNeely is not a guy that was dropping in hardly any of the mocks out there. I had him going 14 to San Antonio, and that's more or less right about where you'd seen him going. It probably on average. I mean, I wasn't really seeing him drop much past the teens. So, I mean, his value at this point is absolutely exquisite. And in terms of the player rankings for FDH, in terms of our best available players, him at number 19, he is the best available player right now. And after that, you've got again Rasheer Fleming, 25, Ryan Kalkbrenner, 27, the center from Creighton. Another guy where it's a little bit surprising that he's fallen to this point, and honestly, this guy feels like a little bit of a Phoenix pick. Noah Penda, the swingman from France, stylistically feels like a Phoenix pick. And then 30, Maxime Reynaud, the center from Stanford. Phoenix probably won't do that in light of the earlier pick, but yeah, that's one where, again, if they know what's good for them, they'll take Liam McNeely with this pick here, and it's a good amount of upside for this part of the draft. You don't generally see that at this stage of the game, and what it comes from, again, is with McNeely kind of being a pure small forward. This goes to what I talked about, is that so much of this is dependent on what the specific needs of teams are. And that's the whole thing here too. And that, like, this is nothing on McNeely for the fact that he is dropping, but you just had team after team after team that was looking either not at small forward, or if they had a need at small forward, perhaps they also had a need at power forward and they got a swing guy, or they also had a need at shooting guard and they got a swing guy. So that's where, again, McNeely, if he was disadvantaged by anything, it's the fact that in a draft with so many different swing guys, so many of them, he's sort of a pure small forward. So that might have worked against him, but that's not reason enough to have a drop like this. He's going to work out well.
Too, Rick, there are a couple of other dudes that are within range right now for some of these teams, for both Phoenix and the Clippers. That could be interesting. One guy I know you didn't mention, but I think is arguably one of the more interesting players left remaining in draft, is a Deuterio of Arkansas, who is a 6'6" guy who can kind of do a little bit of everything, draws a lot of fouls. Kind of a guy that I could see turn into a guy like Dort in OKC, who's kind of a tweener that no one really knew what to do with him, but could be a bad player. And a couple of the European players that I didn't get to mention yet, of Bogar Markovic from Serbia, who played really well in his first season in the Adriatic League, essentially winning the Rookie of the Year out there. And a guy that we both have talked about a lot, that I would be a little surprised if he went here, but I mean, Johnny Broome from Auburn is still here. Would not be shocked if he snuck in as a first-round pick. Another couple players that I don't think will go until later, but could be really interesting to see, like guys like Vaslav Golden of Michigan, Lachlan Ulbrich of Australia, and Dink Pate is also going to be within that timeline.
Yeah, and I will say, looking ahead here to the second round, which will be tomorrow night, we will not be covering this in real time. But looking at this here, I have a sinking feeling because I'm looking at 32, Boston, Johnny Broome, like, that just makes way too much sense not to happen. And he just feels like a guy I'm going to be shaking my fist at the TV seeing him play against the Cavs in the years to come. He feels like a good fit for them. Like, I don't want to see that happen.
I mean, I feel like this second, I will note too, like this second round in comparison to the last couple is a very deep second round of interesting guys.
It is. And that's a guy. And again, and what's interesting is, and I'm not saying this out of any type of, vested interest here, as you might perhaps suspect when I bring up his name, Mark Sears, because again, anybody that leaves the Bobcats, as far as I'm concerned, is no longer a member of the Bobcat family. But just for everything that the guy did at Alabama, it's really, really, really interesting that, like, I'm seeing him at the bottom of the second round, if at all. And you don't generally see guys who've had such decorated college careers where that's the case. Broome worked his way up to this point where he's a sort of a swing first, second round candidate. Clayton worked his way all the way up into the first round. And that's a thing where it's really interesting because Sears is kind of a throwback to the whole thing of like, oh, that guy's just a college guy, that whatever. Like, as we're sort of evolving away from that mentality, he's a guy where, to his detriment, that kind of stuck to him, of a guy where it's like he's just a pure college star who won't really materialize, maybe even as a rotation player in the pros, which I find interesting.
And here's McNeely was the pick for Phoenix.
Yeah.
And again, he's going to be an interesting player, I know, as they get younger, as they try and decide what they're going to do with Devin Booker and Jalen Green and just that entire crew. I will say, too, as a deep sleeper, they've done a relatively good job in this draft.
Well, and I'll say this for FDH Lounge dignitary Derek Allen, where I was I ragged on it earlier, the pick of Maluk that they ended up making there. I didn't see where that really fit in as well for Phoenix. McNeely's a guy where he borderline could have been taken at 10. So, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like if you do it the other way around, it makes sense. I mean, you came out of the first round with McNeely and Maluk. So, Derek, your team ended up redeeming itself here in the end. And for a team that's owned, for a team where I have no love whatsoever for the owner because he's the jealous Dan Gilbert wannabe, I hate to give credit to the organization, particularly since I think James Jones is no longer calling the shots in basketball operations there. So, I would have a nice thing to say about any organization that had James Jones in a position of power, but I don't believe that's the case anymore. But nevertheless, good pick for them here.
Yeah,
Very good pick
for them. And again, like we said, I think this draft will probably, like outside the big stories, like we're going to probably be talking about a lot of these guys who were projected decent picks in a lot of these mocks.
Yep.
Like this will be the draft of a lot of good players who fell, essentially.
And it is noting on TV Montverde Academy, Flag, Queen, McNeely, and Newell from this draft that it all come out of there. So very interesting.
To note too, like as I mentioned, I believe earlier in this draft, this was part of the Mark Williams trade to Phoenix.
Okay.
Yeah, wait, excuse me. I want to make sure I get this. Yeah, my mistake. This is not Phoenix's pick anymore. This is Charlotte's pick.
Oh, okay. Oh, well, that makes a lot more sense.
Mistake. Let me get that correct now.
Traded to Hornets. Okay.
Yeah. So he goes to the Hornets, and again to go back to what.
Sorry, Derek. I take it back.
Sorry, Phoenix. That's all right.
Yeah. Wait a minute. So they took Sorber, or I'm not Sorber, Maluk. They took Maluk, and they're getting Mark Williams.
Mark Williams too. Yeah.
What is going on here?
Yeah,
okay.
That's an interesting question.
Well, wait a minute.
But
wait a minute, Phoenix. Why should that be necessary, Phoenix? You took a center over Luka Doncic in 2018.
That was discussed, Rick, in Phoenix. They needed centers, so they have it. But again, as we are on hour number 3 hour and 30 minutes as we get to the final pick. I will say though too is again very similar to Brooklyn. Charlotte's had a very good draft too so far as well. They also getting out Gon Kneppel at 4, so they're getting more shooting. Because again, if you watch Charlotte for any reason last year, you could tell that was one of their major issues. And Charles Lee is one of the great head coaches in today's NBA. And the one thing I know about Charles Lee is he likes to shoot the three. So getting two guys who can shoot the three can definitely help that floor spacing in Charlotte.
They were just interviewing Liam McNeely, who was weeping on camera, and he can be forgiven for that because I too would be weeping if I had been told that I'd just been traded to Charlotte. But I will say, as far as very impressive mom, by the way. Big thumbs up to Mrs. McNeely here, seeing her on screen. So. Yeah.
We're running out of energy.
It's the late night. It's the late night part of the proceedings here.
We've got NBA draft after dark now.
Yes, after dark, baby.
All right, so the Clippers are on the clock, Rick. A handful of guys on the board. Who do you think they're going to go with?
Well, all right. In the mock, I had them going with Ryan Kalkbrenner. My mock has not been holding up very well thus far in the draft, but I will say I get vindicated in spot 30. Let's say Kalkbrenner. Yeah. The center from Creighton. Yeah. And that Noah Penda would fit in interestingly well as well here.
Yeah. Also a guy that had been discussed with a lot of different teams. Alex Tooney of Australia could also be in there too. Okay.
Yeah, that's possible. And in terms of some of the guys still on the clock, I don't want to say that I didn't see any mock drafts where Sheer Fleming wasn't going somewhere in the first round, but he was in the vast majority of them. So, like I said, I had him going 27.
Based off of the best available. Like we saw both Ronald and Fleming in the bottom half of this first round. So I don't think any of these guys, like outside of McNeely falling, I don't think there's anything that was really dramatically changed.
Yeah, we're past the point where anything would be shocking if a guy slipped out of the first round. I mean, like I said, Fleming was probably in most of the first round mocks that I saw. But I mean, even that, like it was, and he was in the teens in some of them. I will say that, teens and 20s. So it would be somewhat surprising, but again, it depends on what they're looking to do. And Kalkbrenner is really, more of a pure center type player here. So I could see that being who they would go for.
At one point, I think there was a lot of discussion too that he could have been taken by either Boston or a couple of these picks ahead. I mean, he was the 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, 4-time, I believe, if I remember properly.
Oh, I would have been irate if he went to Boston, and I will be if that happens in the second round. Yeah. He's another guy that feels like he's going to be a Boston guy that you hate to play against. Like him and Johnny Broom. At least they can't draft both of them theoretically. So,
right.
But that's where, it just a couple of these guys here. Like I said, as I'm looking at my top 30, as I'm looking at my mock, and then again, all this of course can be found Pro Hoops Draftology 2025 available on the main page at fantasydrafthelp.com. And we are seeing now that the pick is in, and thus far later in the draft, Wikipedia has not been scooping the commissioner quite as much. Let's see. Here we go. Yannick Conan Niederhauser from Switzerland.
I was actually going to bring his name up at one point, Rick.
Okay.
So I guess, again, I don't want to say
Penn State small forward
of the NBA draft, but the Mr. Irrelevant of the
first round. Yeah.
Of the first round. So he was a guy who showed a lot of potential at the G League Elite camp.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of talk about him. And he's a Swiss center, great size, great explosiveness. The question, and again, it's the final pick of the first round of the NBA draft. Again, the real question is, will his game translate? So he's kind of a guy, he spent a decent amount of time at Penn State, had some pretty good moments. He shot over 61% from the field.
Yeah.
In the limited amount of action that he got to see. And again, overall, one thing that if we've learned anything from like the draft this year, Rick, is that there are a lot, I feel like, again, gonna have to say it, wingspan is definitely being talked about in the NBA again. And a lot of these picks are going to be there. But I was going to add him as my favorite name guy on this draft list. And he ends up being the 30th overall pick. So I think also a very solid pick for the Clippers just in general, because I know they definitely need some rangy size, because we saw what happened to them when they had to face Nikola Jokic. So any guy that can come in and with a decent wingspan and play some good defense, it's definitely important.
And in terms of any guys that have any kind of real upside, they're a team where they're kind of locked into where they are right now, which is more or less among the top contenders in the West, sort of middle of the pack in there. And again, as long as they're building around Leonard and Harden, and they're going to for, at least the next year or two or whatever, it's like they're going to be on that path. But then they don't really have, it's hard to see, particularly with, Ballmer wanting to put all the butts in seats in his new place there. You don't really see a scenario where it's going to be a real downturn after that. So it's like whatever they do to try to build the next incarnation of this thing, they're going to try and do it on the fly. It's very hard to do. It's very difficult, but they're going to try. So taking a guy with some upside here really kind of makes sense in this spot. That's where it's like, if you're the Clippers, you don't really want to play it safe, because you do kind of, and again, I don't have a lot of faith in their ability to, even though, again, clearly one of the 5 best coaches in the league in Ty Lue, no question about that. But just in terms of the core that they have, is it going to be enough to get them over the top? Probably not. But it's a thing where rather than just stack pieces on top of what you have, you got to start trying to kind of look for who's going to help be guys to build around in the next incarnation of this thing. And this guy maybe can.
Yeah, and I think if you just look at some of his highlights when he was at Penn State, he definitely is a rangy defender who can make plays. And again, if we're looking at the Western Conference, Rick, when you have essentially guys like Hartenstein and Şengün and Wemby and all these like talented big men, you have to know that you're going to have to get guys that can guard them at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even if he is not the fit at the end, the one thing that is really good is that he's a projected guy. You can get he strikes me as someone who can be kind of like a better version of like an Ed Davis or a guy who can just
Yeah.
project out to be the second or third forward center off your bench, essentially.
Right.
At a very cheap cost at 30 at this point.
But by the way, Ed Davis, I would be remiss if I didn't tell this story here. Great story involving an international controversy involving one of our great FDH Lounge dignitaries, the very colorful Lloyd Carroll, who always covers the NBA draft for Queen's Chronicle. So when Ed Davis was drafted, Lloyd was there in the media room. And Lloyd being a CPA, a lot of times he likes to ask financial questions. So he asked Ed Davis about the tax implications of being drafted in Canada with their tax rates or whatever. Ed Davis gets this deer in the headlights look and stammers out some kind of an answer. And the next afternoon on Toronto Sports Radio, there's all the hosts are indignant. Like, who's this Yank? Who's asking these gotcha questions of our player? So Lloyd was getting roasted on Toronto Sports Radio. I can't think of Ed Davis without thinking of that story. How much Lloyd loved it. The quintessential moment there. Although I would say also him telling Eric Mangini at a press conference circa 2009 that he is less popular than Bernie Madoff. I think that probably is a close second. but so on that note, so all right. So some of the winners and losers of the night. Obvious winners: Dallas, San Antonio. I got to go on a qualified basis for Philadelphia because they loaded up that backcourt when they didn't need to, and they needed a forward. Charlotte's a winner. Utah's a winner to me. I think Washington adding Johnson to the mix, if nothing else, helps there. In terms of anybody else that I was impressed with
is a pretty
some of their picks.
Tonight.
Brooklyn, I guess, for on a qualified basis, they didn't get any difference makers, or not obvious ones yet. But
and then obviously too, the two teams in Florida, Miami and Orlando, getting two young, good guard prospects much later than a lot of us projected.
I think so. And like I said, as painful as it is for me to say as a Cavs fan, I'm going to lump OKC in there, getting Sorber in there to potentially become their center of the future and potentially solve that. And I think also, is there anybody else that I might kind of single out?
I mean, I know you brought Memphis earlier. Memphis was definitely.
Oh, Memphis, yeah. I mean,
if they were able to find their new Desmond Bane in Cedric Howard, isn't
that incredible that they might have, the fact that there's even a chance that they did, if they replaced Desmond Bane with a cheaper version of him and got 4 number ones. I mean, they'll be writing that in business school textbooks 50 years from now.
And again, obviously,
it doesn't redeem them for giving away Pau Gasol, by the way, even though that was different people.
At the end of the day, I feel like I think most of the losers are pretty much obvious. Like, I think Phoenix, obviously, number one.
Phoenix,
probably again, it's a very slight edge over Portland right now. But
Portland, yeah,
it's both them and Portland. The only question for Portland right now is the discussion point was there was a report. I'm not kidding. As I was monitoring social media during the draft, there was a Denver Nuggets scout that allegedly has said Hanson Yang is the Chinese Nikola Jokic. So we will see.
He better be.
Yeah, but I feel like the most obvious loser so far tonight is Phoenix, even though they did get a really good player. I really think he is going to be that rim protector that we saw when he was playing at 2. Yeah, so but those two seem like the most obvious ones right now.
Because it's not a long list of them. I mean,
I guess I like what Utah did, but if the Ace Bailey situation doesn't work out for them,
I mean,
to be honest, I'd make the argument we could put Utah on that list. Very far down the list, but it feels like of the 3 teams we were probably least impressed by, that was probably the third one. Because if Bailey holds out and doesn't go, they essentially collected 2 guys that are very similar to other players on that existing roster.
Yeah, everything hinges on keeping Bailey. I mean, I've got them as a qualified winner because I think somehow they're going to keep Bailey. But it's a thing where, like Phoenix, too. I mean, Phoenix and Portland being the losers in this thing. Liam McNeely drops to them at 29, and their instinct is to trade him?
Well, that was already initially part of the original trade, though, Rick.
Was that?
Yeah, I think that was part of that trade with Mark Williams initially. That was
okay. Okay. All right. So they didn't realize. Okay, they did not realize he was gonna. But they surely realized how screwed they were when he dropped the 29. How stupid they were gonna look. But again though, Mark Williams. I mean, so duplicative of taking Maluk. I mean, what are they looking at here? Again, to modify the punchline I had from before, the concept is the Twin Towers, but with a quarter of the scoring. I mean, I don't understand that.
Yeah, again, it's going to be very, very interesting because essentially both Phoenix and Portland's situations now turn into, will both of these guys continue to pan out? And I would make the argument that I'm a little bit more questioning of Phoenix's plan here because at least with Portland, I can at least, how do I put it? I can at least, I don't want to say defend them, but I can also say like they took a risk on a guy who could be really good at 16, hypothetically, in comparison to Phoenix, who essentially traded for the same player and got a guy very similar to him in the same draft.
I don't get it. And that's where, in the case of Portland with that pick, okay, that's one of those things where, look, every once in a while in pro sports, a team is right and everybody else is wrong.
Yeah.
The only way
but it's Portland, not a lot of oftentimes, Rick.
I always say that, I'm a student of the percentages. I always go by the percentages. And that's why I never like that thing being, whenever a team tries to do it, it's much like, again, the number one reason that I was opposed to the Browns taking Baker Mayfield in 2018 is because, again, short quarterbacks don't hit that often in the NFL. I mean, you had Drew Brees, Russell Wilson, they were about a decade apart. Okay, that's how often you get like a really, really excellent one. Maybe you could put Kyler Murray in the mix subsequently. But my thing was like, am I going to bet on the Browns getting it right? Okay, that's the classic example of if you're a student of the odds, you go away from that one direction. I said take Sam Darnold. It took until this past year, but I was vindicated on that. But anyways, it's like,
it's one of those things where it feels like value-wise, it was a bad decision.
It's very, very low percentage when it's a thing where like, trust us, we're right and the rest of the world is wrong. That's what it's going to take for this not to be a bust for Portland in this pick. I don't want to hear that the guy was a solid player for a decade. It was the 16th pick. Nobody else had him going in the first round. Nobody. You could have gotten him lower. So,
and like I said, too, the only thing to bring up in this, like what makes it look worse is at the same time that New Orleans made a similar trade to get them a little bit deeper.
Yeah,
that's the only thing that I, in my opinion, I'll make this rule. I feel like that what makes Portland's scenario just worse at this point is that literally another team did a similar deal to push them down.
Yes, and also
again, if it works out, it works out. It's the right move. But again, like I always, especially in today's NBA, are really kind of centers are always the toughest thing to judge at the end of the day. And let's be honest. The really great ones are great, and the ones that are just, they are. But, again, like I said, surprises, it's the NBA draft, Rick. There's always going to be a surprise, and that was our surprise of the day.
There's going to be, and that, and as much as I said, and again, as much as I'm, rooting for it to work out, because Cedric Howard's a heck of a story, but where I'm just, there's part of me that is just a little bit bred to be suspicious of like the whole, when somebody just becomes the sort of it girl of the draft out of nowhere, that's where I kind of get a little suspicious.
And again, I would like to make the note too with Coward in comparison to Yang. Like Yang at least played a full season in the Chinese league.
He did.
Howard played 6 games at
he did. And yet, with that being the case with each of these players, it's the far bigger risk to trade out of taking Coward because of what everybody now thinks of him. Because his established value became a lottery pick out of nowhere, and Hansen wasn't a guy that anybody had going in the first round. So it's a thing where to trade out of Coward and what he could become, for this guy, you better hope that it's the Chinese Joker. You better hope so, Portland, because that's what it might take for you not to look like idiots here. And again, if it hits, then you made the greatest draft value of all time. You were right. We were wrong. We got to eat horse manure, etc. But that's what it's going to take. It's going to take this guy becoming a star for that pick not to really stick.
And I mean, one point I'm getting like messages from at least my sources or discussion, that there will probably be a trade upcoming for Portland regarding just for the amount of talent that they have and discussion.
Okay.
What's going on in their roster. So
they're
stay tuned. Jeremy Grant will be going somewhere in the next couple of weeks.
Well, that makes sense. Offloading him makes sense. Simons for Holiday makes me scratch my head, and it makes me irate that while Boston is downsizing their roster financially, they get back a player like Simons. It's just
this is it's a weird scenario too, because so far Joan Cronin between the lines has done a lot of good job in Portland.
Yeah, and
these are two interesting decisions that will either be great or will not be great.
I just when I saw that Boston trade, that prompted me. I started sending out.
My bigger thing wasn't necessarily the trade, but they also had to give additional second round picks in that trade.
Yeah,
why would you do that then?
I don't get it. I think you were one of the people that I sent the Jesse Pinkman thing to. He can't keep getting away with it. That's how I feel when I see Boston do something like that. But I just why Portland would willingly be the bottom in that situation. So,
I know we're about to close up. I did have one question late.
Okay.
So like the dudes remaining in the second round at this point, who do you think is the best player? Is it going to be Penda? Is it going to be Kalkbrenner? Is it? I know Fleming was a guy too that has now fallen out of the first round. Again, he was mocked late.
Yeah, I think it's going to be Fleming. I mean, I really do. I think I think they're all kind of bunched up together. I think, Kalkbrenner kind of right now is what he is as a big guy. Penda is intriguing as a swingman prospect, but the thing of it is, falling out of the first round, when we saw a couple of these other French guys that are a little bit kind of speculative already go at this point, that tells you something. Like, this is not a draft where people were unwilling to swing on Euros. And again, and as we said, we are in one of the final drafts in the history of the NBA where we're going to have to kind of squint to kind of do the apples to apples comparisons here, because a year from now, 2 years from now, any of these guys will all be in college because NIL. For the whole thing of that, like, when it was thought that college is losing all its star power. Well, it was one of those things where, again, the NBA didn't get rid of the one and done things here. The NBA, it was thought that in the last collective bargaining thing that they might let guys start going right to the NBA again. They didn't take that out of the collective bargaining, having to spend at least 1 year doing something. Now you can go to college, you can get well paid in a top program, learn how to win, et cetera, and you put the Euro influx in. And the Euro influx is coming. That CBS Sports article is right. The Min is the tip of the iceberg. Everybody like Penda and these other guys will be coming. And ironically, Penda himself will have something to do with it because he becomes a bit of a cautionary tale washing out of the first round. That's going to be one more compelling reason to move to the good old US of A, is so that doesn't happen to you, so that you can be evaluated on an apples-to-apples basis. You're in there, you're playing in the NCAA tournament, you're going head-to-head, and you're not being a guy like Penda where it's overseas, where it's like, I see him doing this. How does it equate to what these other guys are doing? So, again, that's a thing where I, for one, think that's going to be a great development, because it's going to make it a lot easier for us to all be able to compare these guys on a level basis, which is what you're looking for in a draft.
Yeah, and I think, the one thing, at least for my final thought for this draft, is it was a lot of normalcy near the top, and then a little bit of insanity in the middle, and then we saw a lot of really good guards go late.
We did.
Really intrigued to see if, when we look back on this, whether it's next year or a year down the line, about how many good guards later in that draft got passed for more potential than anything else.
That's right. And I think we're gonna see that those will prove to be very good values. The two guards going to the state of Florida in the 20s, I think we're gonna see that as being something where they benefited from being in those situations. So I think that's how it's going to play out. And then so you and I will get a chance sometime early to mid-July here to kind of recap not only what we're thinking from the draft here with a little bit of space removed from it, but essentially the meat of free agency most years, and the trades and everything like that will come before the start of Summer League. Don't know if that'll be the case this year, because we just keep seeing dominoes keep falling, but like there's only so many of them that are going to fall, right?
Yeah,
it's got to kind of burn itself out at
there's
some
only
point.
A handful left at this point.
There's only a handful left.
There could be something crazy, as we know, could always occur, but it feels like most of the dominoes have fallen.
They probably have. So we'll see what happens in free agency. Free agency will be interesting, but probably not as interesting and earth-shaking as some of the trades that have happened thus far. But we'll get a chance to take sort of an all-encompassing look back on this transactional period here. Roughly somewhere in the ballpark, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks from now, somewhere in that ballpark, we'll take a look at it. I look forward to that as usual with you, Ben Chu, or Ben 11-0 Chu, as you are known in the lounge here, having correctly picked the last 11 NBA finals here on the FDH Lounge. We celebrated that when we recorded our finals review last night. So congratulations yet again, and thank you for being here for a marathon stint with me tonight covering the draft, Ben. Truly joyous to get to do this with you, my good friend.
Well, I appreciate it, man. Next time I need to get an AI version of myself for at least 30 minutes in there.
That's right. That's
we
right.
Got this for all the people who are either watching us or will be watching this back. This is almost 4 hours, no breaks, baby. It's only been 2 on the show. So.
Yeah, unlike the NFL draft, I was a little bit of a ninny and had to duck away for about 90 seconds there or whatever it was at one point. You made it all the way.
I just want to tell y'all, ESPN, y'all,
Yeah.
we did 4 hours almost consecutively of NBA draft.
Well, yeah, and
we're either crazy or we're stupid.
Well, for everyone out there that checked us out, rather than having to slog through Jay Billis and scream at A. Smith, you're welcome. But a pleasure to do this, and a pleasure to do. There's nobody better to do any type of basketball broadcast with than my man Ben Chu. So very grateful, very appreciative. Thank you, Ben Chu, and thank you everybody that checked out the FDH Lounge 2025 Pro Hoops Draft Night 1 Extravaganza on the FDH Lounge.